Hop in the Neo 1 with me as we take a detour from the main Pokemon regions and journey into the Lental region. The perfection of Pokemon ecology, full of interactions between favorites old and new. Emolga roasting berries in the forest, fossil Pokemon living freely without ever having gone extinct. Fog-filled forests of dedicated protectors keeping each other safe. Mythical and legendary Pokemon coming together in unity, and even the famed Illumina phenomenon. I have personally paid my visit to these many islands within the Lental region to study the interactions between Pokemon and nature that you will not see anywhere else. Also, I could bring to you the perfection of Pokemon Snap's ecosystem. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and this was no easy feat. I've spent nearly a month working on this, technically longer, as I streamed me going through all of these islands within Lental. I have legitimately taken my time to play this game, enjoy it, and finally bring as much of it together as I can here. And I mean as much because it is impossible to truly get it all. This will be true ecology, understanding the interactions between Pokemon and nature and Pokemon and each other. We will use what we see in this game, look into any other extra info we know for relevant information, and then use any real-life science to help us explain it further. This, again, is as close as we can get to true ecology of Pokemon, and it is impossible for me to actually verbally state everything that happens in this game. I will have plenty of visual examples happening that I will not even mention. So, I mean, I guess watch the video multiple times if you want to get everything, and even then, you still will not get everything, just like it is impossible to truly see everything that occurs in our real world. And now, without further ado, let's begin with Florio Island itself. Florio Island is based on the Latin word for blossom, something that will be explained through our First Illumina Pokemon when we get to them very shortly. It is a place that only has 3 locations we actually travel through. These would be the Nature Park, the secret side path where we minimize ourselves, and the Laboratory of Ecology and Natural Sciences. I would give anything to be there right now, but unfortunately, for this video, I actually won't be talking about that laboratory. That'll be more important in a video that I will mention a couple of times as we go through this one. Now, this whole island is located in southwest Lental, and Nature Park itself is a fairly simple course that has some open plains, a small forest, a winding river that flows from the bay, and towards the end of our track, we find a field of open flowers. These open flowers will eventually be key towards finding our Illumina Pokemon in their Illumina spot. This Pokemon being Meganium. Now, it's very important that we actually address the Illumina Pokemon of every island before we actually talk about the islands themselves. They can affect what the temperature is like, what the landscape is like, which Pokemon appear, and so much more. And simultaneously, you'll learn that they chose each of these islands simply because they found a home for themselves, something that they can protect, but more on that later. And so for the first time in the Ecology series, I can actually talk about a starter Pokemon naturally appearing in the wild. Now, the Photodex, as it is called in Pokemon Snap, rather than your typical Pokédex, only states that an Illumina Pokemon hadn't been seen on Florio Island for almost a century until we encountered this Meganium, who seems to be very happy living with the other Pokemon in this flowery hill. Meganium is known to be able to release an aroma that calms aggressive feelings, and through its breathing, it can revive dead grass and plants. This can also even go further, helping other non-plant living things regenerate, so you and I. They're known to be peacemakers, as they are also incredibly docile. Now, this Illumina Meganium is only shown at night, but does have quite a few different interactions. One being with the crystal blooms that are seen on the island, 2 more being if it decides to interact with Shaman or Eevee, both being just incredibly adorable encounters, with the Shaman even jumping onto Meganium's head. And this all actually makes sense to see Shaman here, as it is representative of not only flowers, but also clean air. It is known to be able to instantly purify any polluted area of all impurities in the air and transform it into a lush field of flowers. It takes the polluted air, purifies it in its body, breaks it down into water and light, and releases the purified substance in a violent explosive burst. but that's only if there's a lot of, actual negative qualities in the air. Its power does vary on that pollution absorbed. So not only do we have all of these healthy plants and Meganium helping attract other Pokemon into these areas that we will later learn help maintain the quality of our flowers through general health and pollination, but Shaman is here more as representation of just how clean the air actually is. To follow this further, Shaman is more than likely spreading these flowers, or at least landed here as a group in the past. I suggest this is because each season it is stated that Shaman gathers with others in a flower field somewhere and migrates from there. This behavior is called flower carrying because a new field of flowers grow wherever Shaman lands. One interaction as we do move forward that isn't immediately found out, because throughout the map it just kind of Meganium waddles around and checks up on us, see if we're following it. It might be taking a nap in the very beginning, and it even hides behind a tree a little bit without taking any bites of the leaves or flowers. This is because it is actually looking for its friend Hoot Hoot, that it only is revealed once you knock it out of the tree, which you throw a bunch of fluff fruit. If I call them apples, bear with me, but as you keep throwing this fruit, you'll knock out a bunch of Combi from it until eventually the Hoot Hoot falls out. And here's the kicker. Now, there's going to be a shot that I share that shows the Meganium sitting down. This is actually an incredibly rare event, or a very rare event in general, that took Muse Art World, which I'm going to throw her under the bus on this one, like literal real life weeks to even try to get. She's the one that actually did the art for this thumbnail, and it's absolutely beautiful. Meanwhile, on my second or third try, I got Meganium to sit down. That's because this game has actual RNG and so many interactions going on that it is entirely possible to play this game maybe tens, maybe hundreds of times, trying over and over and over again, and you will still get new interactions, tiny details you may not have noticed before. So this is when I admit that some of the footage that I have, I am borrowing from others on the internet, and I will credit them appropriately. But on top of that, there's still so much more than even I can show, and that some things were so frustratingly difficult to try and get footage of that I just can't actually get it. Such as an Emolga that does pop out when you throw Fluffoots in the right section, in addition to Pikachu. There's more that we'll talk about with Emolga later, but of course the Combi in this area are serving to pollinate the flowers here. Now lastly, if you get Meganium into its Illumina state in Research Level 2 of this place, then Sylveon and potentially several Comfey will approach it. I only got it so that the Eevee and Sylveon approached it together happily, and they all were super cute, of course, again. Now, when Meganium smells the Illumina flower, and you've thrown some orbs at it, or Crystal Bloom flower as it's actually called, you watch as it gives off extra energy that seems as though its sweet scent or healing aroma is being let out in massive amounts. This could also just simply be achieved through throwing enough orbs at your Illumina Pokemon, which is typically just a maximum of 3. And to add to this, a very key piece of important information from here forward is that the Illumina orbs are Pokemon energy in physical form adapted and created by Professor Mirror here. As we go along, you'll see how this massive energy, when we provide it to Pokemon, affects Pokemon through giving them more power, allowing them to break free from predators, allowing them to have stronger moves, move faster in general, wake up even, and so much more. So if we take this in mind and assume that there were once far more Crystal Blooms or energy in the area, maybe in the atmosphere or around the islands as a whole, or that they release enough energy to superpower Pokemon at some point, then this is what might have been the creation point of our Illumina Pokemon, who then further affect the islands in which we find them. Though there might be a stronger theory that we'll get to later. Now with Meganium, we know that it is calming other Pokemon, but it also has the move Sweet Scent at its disposal, which will attract other Pokemon. We can easily assume then that a super powered version of this Sweet Scent will attract the many different Pokemon that rely on eating nuts, fruits, nectar, or general foliage. Even if they don't quite eat it, they might rely on healthy green areas for resting spots or to build dams. And finally, this congregation of herbaceous critters will eventually attract the attention of more carnivorous friends. Now that we have our foundation of understanding why the heck this place even became what it is on the larger scale, let's look at all the lives that have made Florio Park their home, starting with the daytime interactions. Now, for the most part, I'm gonna try my best to ensure I don't miss any Pokemon or vital interactions, so we're gonna jump around quite a bit, following Pokemon individually, and I won't always be separating these interactions by their levels. Most of the levels have 1, 2, or 3, or rather, each location has 1, 2, or 3 levels to them, and then a day or night, or other locations as a part of them. So it gets really complicated, and it's better to just talk about the Pokemon across all levels in a given location to make this easier. And it's through these levels that time might pass, new interactions occur, and just developments of the area as a whole. And so, we are going to start with Vivillon, who come in a garden or meadow patterns in this area. They'll fly near us, and then they aren't really seen until the end of the route, where they fly by and join a larger group of their own kind. What's more interesting about them is that we don't even really see their previous evolutions anywhere at all on any island, not on any side path, nowhere. Not even where we would find our other smaller critters of the Pokemon world hiding away. The only real relevant info that they have that transfers into Pokemon Snap is that they might scatter toxic scales, and they're great at finding sources of water. We otherwise have to make a lot of assumptions about it. One of our assumptions being that they are still pollinating flowers despite not having a proboscis and are likely consuming nectar. My other assumption is that since we can't find Scatterbug or Spupa here, its previous forms, our Vivillon are simply migrating here and having babies before migrating back home, and wherever they're having their eggs is kept in secret. My reasoning behind this is that we find a slew of Vivillon patterns that depend on what island we are at when we see them. If they had all been the same pattern, then I would say that they are passing through. You know, big old migration. But since a Vivillon's pattern depends on the climate and topography of the place they are born in, then it must mean that these Vivillon that we see are all born on certain sections of each of these islands. We are just unfortunate to never actually see their previous forms, but this is something that happens with monarchs in the real world. And even though Vivillon is more akin to the Mocker Swallowtail, it is safe to say that there are multiple inspirations given for any Pokemon. And so I quote from the United States Forest Service, "The annual migration of North America's monarch butterfly is a unique and amazing phenomenon. The monarch is the only butterfly known to make a two-way migration as birds do. Unlike other butterflies that can overwinter as larvae, pupa, or even as adults in some species, monarchs cannot survive the cold winters of northern climates. Using environmental cues, the monarchs know when it is time to travel south for the winter, and monarchs use a combination of air currents and thermals to travel long distances, some flying as far as 3,000 miles to reach their destination, or rather their winter home. This isn't to say that Vivillon is always trying to escape the cold, but rather it is searching for the most favorable conditions for itself. There is one other possibility, as there is an event in which you can find a multitude of all the Vivillon throughout these islands coming together for no directly known reason. What we might assume is that these Pokemon could have also been born in similar conditions on other islands and simply fly here. This could still be part of the migration process if conditions are not favorable where they are from, but ultimately there is no singular right answer, so take your pick. Maybe it's a mix of them all, as often real-life answers are. From here, there's a group of Pokemon that you're gonna run into and will continue to run into throughout this area at both daytime and nighttime. Once again, for the sake of organization, we will take these Pokemon as separate encounters from their nighttime events or other locations on the island. During the daytime, both Pichu and Grookey appear right away on your path like a little welcoming committee before they wave or tap their stick and run off. Grookey is just honestly vibing overall, and again, you might see Pichu hiding away in a bush later on with a crown of flowers on its head. You kind of have to orbit, and then it kind of pops out all happy and cute. Now, Pichu and its line are noted to be very intelligent Pokemon, so sure, the Grookey or other friendly Pokemon could have helped create the crown it wears, but there's still a very good chance that Pichu made the crown itself. And towards the end of the route, you can see Pichu, Scorbunny, and Grookey just being happy together. Maybe the Grookey approaches Pichu and it accidentally bumps into it. Now you hopefully start to understand just how many different interactions there are and how it's almost impossible to show or talk about it all. Now, to explain Grookey better, this stick that it uses is infused with special power from Grookey's body. This power is released when rhythmically beat against surfaces of different objects and can result in plant life of all kinds not only growing, but even recovering from wilt amongst other conditions. This effect even extends to other plant-like Pokemon. It'll use sunlight for photosynthesizing, and they are full of boundless curiosity. And while apes may be omnivorous, this is a case in which we could state that the Grookey line may be autotrophs, though I'm sure they eat a nice juicy berry from time to time. And spoiler alert, while many Pokemon in general lore or Pokédex entries state they might hunt other Pokemon, or how they're very aggressive creatures, here in the Lental region, it seems as though, and rather less than seems and is more factual, that it is a far more peaceful union between Pokemon of all species that is formed and continues to exist throughout many of the islands. So we will simply assume, at least within this region only, that these Pokemon are not hunting each other unless we get evidence of it. This isn't to say that there aren't any Pokemon hunting other Pokemon or bothering each other, like, say, an Arbok and a Psyduck, who you'd expect an Arbok to attack a Psyduck, but later on, we'll find out there's a very, very friendly, maybe even romantic little coexistence that exists between those two Pokemon in a later area. Things here are just incredibly different compared to other regions. It's as though their diets are also different due to the region itself, maybe even a lack of competition, maybe even a very, very strong lore reason that I'm going to keep hinting at from now until the end when we actually get to it. So if I'm not speaking about diets as much here as I did with all the other previous Eco videos, then you understand why. I bring this up because after we speak on Scorbunny's appearance here, you'll begin to hear about Pokemon that are distinctly stated to hunt for prey, but might not here. Scorbunny will really shine later on at night, otherwise it can be just kind of seen throughout the routes and having fun with other Pokemon more than anything else. And what I love about Scorbunny is it actually taught me something, and that is that rabbits are crepuscular. I should get Google to say that for me, but even then I can't, rely on that. But this basically means that they are most active during dawn and dusk. So while everyone else here might be seen sleeping, Scorbunny will at first be running around and plenty active, and then when we talk about it later at night, it'll still be a little bit active. Now, this fiery rabbit will get its fire coursing through its body with a simple warm-up run, allowing it to then fight at full power. There's a sac in its chest that contains a fire energy, which it then uses to generate heat from the special pads on the soles of its feet and nose. It's like pressure pads. The more that they get, the more that they build up. It's like, actually, now I think about it, it's almost like a perpetual motion machine, but it's not quite. It gets a little weird. But once that all happens and that heat is built up, it's ready to fight. And the pads on its feet can get so hot that it is capable of using them to start small fires and burn opponents with a kick. These small fires we see all the time while it is running around, though we don't really see a lot else other than it running away from opponents or Pokemon that would otherwise make it feel threatened. And finally, something else I do want to note is that their feet are seen to be lucky. And it turns out from a number of different sources that the reason the rabbit is seen as lucky is actually due to their high fertility. That is definitely something that I feel has been lost over the many, many years because I don't ever remember being told that. And can you believe we're technically still in the opening scene of this area in terms of the first Pokemon we see? But don't worry. As I mention the similar Pokemon we see here, or the same Pokemon we see here as we do in other areas, I will just briefly mention them to really move things along and rather explain the significant interactions. But it's also in this entry scene that we get a herd of Bouffalant, and they are calm, something that is incredibly important considering that they are notably stated to be Pokemon that attack anything that does not have the same afro that they do. Instead, we see them eating grass and relaxing as Pokemon of all kinds might wander near or around them. In fact, the only time they really fight is when you see two of them bumping heads with each other. I also do personally love that they do get closer to the Neo one's path as you level up the route, until eventually the first one you see blocks your path in some capacity. I imagine that this is a reference to one of the inspirations of it being the Buffalo Bison, that's why it's called Bouffalant, not Bouffalant as I say it, who will block the road, and you should not get near them because they might just decide to completely crush you. So you wait for them to pass, and they might even have to get moved by helicopter. Luckily, to my knowledge, this is not something that will occur randomly on a day-to-day basis, since they're primarily kept within a nature preserve where average people, like you and I, don't really go without strong supervision. But back to Bouffalant, there is a point where you can see one towards the end wearing a flower crown, which I once again state is likely Grookey's doing. Maybe some of the other plant Pokemon, it's hard to say. Otherwise, they cheer if illuminated and will only fight when the melody is played. The first real predator of this region is Pidgeot, a Pokemon capable of stirring up storms with just a few flaps of its wings and flying faster than the speed of sound itself. While we see it in this region flying for short distances or preening itself, we can also bother it into moving locations. When we do so, we can make it get closer to where, after throwing a fluff fruit, a Magikarp will fly out of the water as it was just vibing in the shallow water. And then it will continue to flop around until, now that it is flopping around, now that it is making noise and attracting attention to itself, Pidgeot will come flying in, and the consequences of our actions are shown in full as the Magikarp is then taken away as its prey. But don't worry, that's not the end of the story for that Magikarp. We'll move forward though and talk about them later, as Tangrowth makes its home here in a nice little slightly secluded section. And while it is noted to be a Pokemon that will hunt other Pokemon, once again, we don't see that here. Instead, it seems to have a very friendly companionship with other Pokemon as what the norm will just kind of be. And I'll stop mentioning that soon enough. It is noted to eat fruit, and that is what we get to see if we help direct its attention to a fruit high up on a small cliffside. It's a small interaction, but it also shows why the fruit hasn't dropped and created more trees in that little area. Whenever the fruit do fall, there's likely this Tangrowth ready to eat them. And those arms that it uses are genuinely terrifying to me to watch, as they stretch so very far away from it and then pulls that fruit to it, and that only gets worse when we talk about it later. Otherwise, it just vibes and we move on. Emolga is a great moment in miniature ecology as well. I say this because it is noted to be a Pokemon that does eat both bugs and fruit, and despite there being Wurmple all around the area, it seems to actively choose some apples in the area instead. And yes, I mean actual apples. The game notes them as apples, which is one of the only times an actual real life fruit is mentioned, but that's neither here nor there. Emolga presents itself as a mystery at first, because this game has a lot of different missions that you can do, and these missions actually explain a number of the very, very special interactions you see. But you can attract the attention of our fast gliding Pokemon to the charred fruit with fresh fluff fruit, which one will promptly swing on in and use its Thunder Shock to char it before eating it, much like their cousin Pikachu do with any other berries that they find. I also do find it interesting that we have this dense crowding of trees, shrubs, and grass in this small area. It's on a raised area above the water table, so I don't think it was formed by an old river. All we can really say is this small section serves as a great place for Pokemon residing in, on, or around the trees for coverage, safety, or food, such as Wurmple. And you see them crawling all over the place. Their feet have suction pads, so they could just cling to pretty much any surface without slipping at all. They have silk that they might just spit out into the air, which turns gooey once it is exposed to the air, and its diet consists of leaves, sap, and you can pretty much see it preparing to eat, or at least being on the trees or around the leaves all the time. But if you want to see one of these bad boys in action, all you have to do is take a photo of some talo in the next miniature section, which then cause them to fly off, later resulting in one of them cornering a wormpole. If you provide some extra energy through the use of an Illumina orb, then wormpole will gain the strength necessary to release a spray of poison to drive off the would-be predator. This is one of the many amazing examples in which Pokemon advantages and disadvantages in terms of their typings are not the be-all end-all. Because sure, the poison move is neutral, but our flying Pokemon has super effective moves to pick apart our Wormpole here. And despite this, Wormpole is able to drive off Talo and survive to see another day. Heracross makes a brief appearance on the tree of the wooded area, likely just eating sap, as that's its primary source of food within the world of Pokemon. You can knock it down, but otherwise it doesn't really interact with anything here. You can also find a female Heracross, if you're lucky, flying over the lake and landing in later levels when Bidoof have already built their dam. In fact, the Bidoof are first seen grabbing sticks and building their dam in earlier levels until it is finally built at night and you can travel across it. And of course, they built it where the water from the bay is entering into the river itself. This will slow water movement and even just prevent flooding events or strong currents in the area, which makes the coast safer for Pokemon and will even prevent erosion from occurring along the coast. A Pokemon that appears early on and you will see making one of the highest number of interactions on this route and other areas or times of this route is Dodrio. I haven't really mentioned feeding Pokemon throughout this because it just is excessive to talk about. You'll probably see a lot more of it than I will talk about it. But in the case of Dodrio, there is the chance that the heads will fight over Fluffruit. Their squabbling is noted to often occur until at least one of the heads gets something to eat, which then satisfies all of them because they share a stomach. Otherwise, we'll talk about it antagonizing, if not straight up hunting smaller Pokemon later. And as we do move along the track, we will see a slew of different Pokemon. What I love to see here is the Swanna and Ducklet sticking together. You'd imagine that many different Pokemon may stick around their young, but it's nice to see the confirmation through Lental region ecology itself. We see swimming or flying together, even bobbing their heads under the water. Ducklet, as it trains its body by diving into the depths of ponds. This increases its strength to help it search for its favorite food, and its diet consists of both peat and bog moss. One of the most important pieces of information is that when we look at Photo Dex entries, we have information that we otherwise may not see in any other Pokedex in the anime or the games whatsoever. And so, with the Photo Dex, it states, these Ducklet were born and raised on the lake in the nature park. They're not great flyers yet, but they'll eventually learn by watching and imitating Swanna. But they do not stay here forever. In fact, it turns out through the Photodex once again, we learn that Swanna migrate to the lake in the nature park for the winter, and then when spring arrives, they all take flight at once, which is compared to a scene from a painting. If the secret route is taken, then Torterra will appear at the end of this route, but we'll save their information for now. I feel like a broken record saying that. You might notice Hoot Hoot sleeping away in a tree since it is a nocturnal Pokemon, and hiding away in the tall grass once again is Shaman, who does join a number of other Pokemon and happily coexists with them. At the end of this route, you'll notice that it is very similar to the one in which we find Meganium, though it is here that we see Comfey and Florges assumedly tending to the flowers here. Comfey are, at the very least, here to pick flowers and attach them to the ring on its body. They're also able to release a soothing fragrance that affects it and its allies, while also ensuring that their flowers never wither. So they serve the flower fields while also getting the flowers they need in peace. Pretty simple. And when we look into or include Florges into this equation, we grow to understand that this field of flowers is theoretically the culmination of the plant-based Pokemon on this island, because Florges is known to tend to large gardens, not just drawing its energy from it, but also giving large amounts of energy to the garden itself. They can live for several hundred years as they devote their lives to these fields, controlling them, helping them flourish. And it is even said that they contain healing properties for both the body and the spirit. And anyone who harms the garden is hunted down by them. This all ties really nicely to Meganium, or scents in general, smells in general. This whole island is about blooming or blossoming. It is called Florio Island after all. And so we find this mixing of scents that are healing or attracting others, or even calming the general population, as we talked about with Meganium and its sweet scent or aromatherapy. Now, there are a few Pokemon left during the daytime here that we only see if we shrink down and travel through the secret path, which is technically a whole other route itself. Here, we find the follow-up to Dodrio chasing smaller Pokemon as it chases both Pichu and Scorbunny, and those two Pokemon find refuge with a grouping of Torterra who will then scare it away. Otherwise, the majority of this secret path up to this point is just enjoying many of our Pokemon being larger than us, seeing them from a different angle and how they react to us. You get some Bidoof Bud as it hides in a log, a Snorlax that you can wake up by feeding it enough, but more importantly, there is an entire section of mushrooms. This whole area found between the roots and fallen logs is shown to be a perfect little place for mushrooms to find their food. And these are some pretty significantly sized mushrooms, as even Emolga is seen standing on one of them. This is a Pokemon that, for reference, stands at 1 foot and 4 inches, or roughly 0.4 meters tall, and weighs 11 pounds or 5 kilograms, which means that mushroom is pulling some heavy-duty work for itself. There are Shroomish in this area as well, which help confirm that this area is truly great for mushrooms of all kinds, as these Pokemon prefer humid areas like tropical forests, which, if this is a nice warm area, which it is, and we have the bay nearby, which we do, it makes sense that it would also be a little bit of a humid area. Otherwise, during the day, Shroomish likes to hide under the shades of leaves and eats composted soil in forests primarily composed of fallen, rotted leaves. Throw an orb at the crystal bloom they stand near, and they'll dance and release spores, which you really shouldn't breathe in because they're very deadly, but it doesn't seem to cause any issues to anybody here. This might even be the reason why there are so many different kinds of mushrooms in the area, which is really fun to think about the idea that when mushroom Pokemon or even other plant Pokemon release seeds or spores, they're not just recreating themselves, which is something that is actually confirmed at the end of this. Once you do leave here though, you get your last daytime encounters as Sylveon will be found sleeping at the flower field. It is fascinating that we get both Eevee and Sylveon in these areas, with Sylveon representing friendship as an evolution. This further exemplifies just how close-knit the Pokemon here are, and more specifically the effect Meganium has, since Eevee was seen only with Meganium in these areas during the nighttime. That isn't to say that it isn't interacting with other Pokemon, as we'll soon talk about enough during our nighttime encounters. We'll actually continue talking about this secret path at night, because Shroomish aren't the only mushroom Pokemon either. Instead, our Neo one bounces on top of a group of fungus who appear to be carrying fruit towards this sleeping Snorlax. They'll also release spores if hit with a life orb, which, now that I think about it, is very cool, because by filling them with excessive life, same as we did with the Shroomish, they then decided to spread that life and try to reproduce or create other mushrooms, whatever the heck they are doing. Many other Pokemon are seen asleep through this route at night, but there is a significant encounter with Murkrow who appear near a sleeping Pinsir. While Pinsir sleeps underground to stay warm during these colder nights, Murkrow is out here being active, even fighting other Pokemon for sparkly objects or food. Their food source isn't really stated, but considering crows have a very varied diet and will go as far as hunting other animals, in the very special case we have here, we can then cause them to fly away, only to reappear with several other Murkrow in their murder to try and intimidate a Pidgeot in its nest, maybe even trying to steal some of its food. This Pidgeot is a little disturbed and very groggy, wondering who all these sassy children are yelling at it, but once we throw an Illumina orb at it, it'll take off with the Murkrow in hot pursuit. which then allows us to throw one more orb and watch as the Magikarp we saw during the daytime now has the energy to not only escape, but then move on. Not only will we find it in the flower field of the nature park at the end now, but we'll also see it kind of flopping around the Tangrowth and all these other Pokemon in the area. And we can orbit and it'll jump away, you know, way off. Look, they're hardy creatures that are said to be able to survive in any environment. I suppose the lack of water doesn't bother them either. And returning to like the beginning of this route, because you've probably noticed a lot of Pokemon that I haven't mentioned and I'm gonna have to keep going back for, so bear with me. But a lot of bug Pokemon make their entrance. Caterpie, who are feeding on leaves, can be orbed through a crystal bloom to then release silk. Combee, who are now pollinating flowers, flying around, interacting with each other. Hoot Hoot, bouncing on the mushrooms and watching the commotion, and all of those Combee happily reporting in to a Vespiquen hiding away. Though it's not always happy. I swear the first time that I saw it and interacted with it, they were happy interactions, and you can get them to dance, which you can also do in the flower field. But when I was retaking footage to try and just get better footage for all of this, the Combee were really upset for one reason or another, because the Vespiquen was yelling at them, whatever else it is going on. This nighttime air is perfect for the Pokemon, not just because they are likely hiding away from predators or antagonistic Pokemon, but because it's much cooler at night and allows them to pollinate easier. Though one other reason is likely because the flowers they prefer may be blooming at night, as some flowers are apt to do. Said flowers here seem to even glow with life. I also want to note before I forget, I don't want to make it sound like bees are pollinating at night. I'm fairly sure that there's probably one species that is out there doing so, but they want to stay warm, they want to stay where they're safe, and they're probably going back to their hive, most likely, when it's nighttime, unlike our Combee here. But now we can finish up with talking about the special events that occur at night in the main park path. One being that Scorbunny is putting on a show early in the night with flaming kicks, and if it is empowered with an orb, those flames burn a very bright blue, showing that they have a higher temperature thanks to the increase in power. And once again, you will notice many sleeping Pokemon, but one that seems to have moved between daytime and nighttime is Tangrowth, now appearing earlier on our route. And if you throw an orb at it, it will bring about a terror I feel deep in my spleen, as it just jumps up, extends its arms an incredibly long distance to a nearby cliff, and just launches itself there. It's just a sight to behold. We do also have the chance to see Heracross and Pinsir fight each other, if you're not me, because I think I spent about 15, 20, 30 minutes over and over again trying to get them to interact with each other, but the Heracross just would not appear. The reason for their conflict is literally only because they both like sap. And I will also note that Pinsir eating a fluff fruits and opening up its teeth, you know, horizontally is horrifying to me. From here, there are plenty of other small sites or interactions, one including Eevee and Pikachu appearing if you take this side path, but the last major bit of interesting information is that if the fight between Heracross and Pinsir does occur, and you wake up Sylveon in the area, it will move ahead to stop the fighting with the assistance of you using the melody that you can play out of your speakers in the Neo 1. And it's a nice little interaction, I do suppose. And this is the last time I will say it, but you should play this game for yourself after listening and watching this whole video, because it is truly impossible for me to include everything in this video. Otherwise, this video would probably be 6, 7, 8 hours long due to the sheer number of interactions that there are. But for now, let's move on to Belusylva Island. Things are about to get incredibly wild, and I dare say even more beautiful and mysterious as we move forward. Bits and bobbles of lore may spring up, but we aren't here to solve the lore of Lental, at least not in this video. Belusylva, though, is derived from the Latin word belus, for beautiful, allowing you to potentially predict that our Illumina Pokemon is Melodic, or Milotic, however the heck you say it. Known as one of the most beautiful Pokemon in lore, the Illumina spot is in a crystal clear lake, something that may remind us of Kitakami's crystal pool, where we also see a major Melodic appear. We see these trees with massive roots, and I want to call this a mangrove, but I have no way of knowing for sure. Also, as a quick explanation, because people have asked, I say roots, not roots, so, you know, I don't know, it's a weird accent thing. But it's simply described as a lake as well, rather than it being akin to a swamp. So we're just gonna do our best and describe it as a lake that is the end place for all the water that travels throughout this island. And trust me, there's plenty of water traveling through these areas. We get the hardy Magikarp again, but we also get a slew of other Pokemon that appear here at higher levels. We get the hardy Magikarp here again, but we also get a slew of other Pokemon that appear here at higher levels. Many of them are incredibly vital to how the forest works and protects itself, starting with Trevenant, who is found close to these ancient ruins. Through the photo decks, not Pokédex, it's said that if anyone tries to harm the forest, Trevenant will trap them inside of a thick fog. Something that we're gonna see a lot of later, but it's kind to forest-dwelling Pokemon and others that it trusts. There are also plenty of ancient ruins throughout these islands, and they serve as a sign that humanity was once here long ago, on all of the islands, in very, very difficult to get places, unless you lived there before a disaster, or were a Pokemon. But for what reason we truly know they were here for, we don't know yet, or at least you don't. You'll spot, though, throughout these areas, a slew of Kecleon, as we will in other locations on this island, camouflaged away. They love their games of hide and seek, even though they get very upset when they aren't found. Otherwise, they are said to target bug Pokemon, but again, we don't really get to see that at any point. Instead, they seem to act like the eyes of the island, very watchful and just invisible to us unless we're searching for them. A pair of Bulbasaur might waddle through, and they make their home here as they can get plenty of sunlight, allowing them to grow the bulb on their back and avoid having to forage for any food unless absolutely necessary. Even they act as a sort of guardian, demonstrating a nurturing instinct towards younger and weaker Pokemon, picking up crying babies to gently sing them and rock them to sleep, and that's to say nothing about the Venusaur that we will get to later. I will note that the Bulbasaur here are said to need the assistance of other Pokemon in order to nurture and eventually evolve their own bodies and needs. Yet another guardian, or should I say with respect, Lord of the Forest, does make their appearance. Surfacing from the water or in other areas is a Superior who can halt a foe's movements with a simple piercing glare. They're regarded as a noble Pokemon and even have the fleur de lis symbol on their body, which denotes a French royal connection. And as if there weren't enough Guardians, Ninetales is here, skulking about, watching ever so closely. Being a vengeful Pokemon in their own right, they wait until you cause any trouble to do anything in retaliation to you. Lotad is here, a Pokemon that does ferry other Pokemon who can't swim across the water. Otherwise, they may be one of the most normal Pokemon here and in the other areas as we move backwards through the routes. But what's more important is that everyone we have spoken of so far is a guardian or helps other Pokemon, up until we get to Espeon, who sleeps at the end of this route. This Espeon is arguably even more vital, or at least just as vital and impactful as the Melodic we'll be expanding on in a moment. This is because Espeon may very well be the guardian and major scout of this island when Melodic is away or spending its time here, and only here in this area does it finally rest. Now, finally we get to speak of Melodic, our Illumina Pokemon. It passes through the roots of trees, it graces our eyes as it jumps above the water, and will even create large twisters when it has been filled with enough energy. But there is only one important detail that ties Melodic here and the entire nature of this island at its core, because it is stated that when there are fights going on, Melodic has the power to calm angry feelings and end arguments by releasing a wave of energy. So once again, we have this very basic power property of a Pokemon that is supercharged. For Meganium, it was its scent, fueled by incredible Illumina powers. For Melodic, its ability to exude this power has created a loving and friendly ecosystem on this island, banishing angry feelings from most of the Pokemon here and creating this area in which we find a lot of what could be very strong or aggressive predators being even friendlier than the other islands. As always, this isn't to say that its power is all-consuming and it completely prevents all strife, because we will see Pokemon chasing each other soon or fighting over territory, but that may also be because Melodic had disappeared for some time, only now appearing, as we are told, because of the Illumina Meganium appearing. Now, what we're going to do for most of these islands, starting here, is something that is a little different and that will better tie the themes and the ecosystems together. We're going to be moving backwards from the Illumina spot as we now study the Elsewhere Forest. This forest may remind you of the Lost Forest, and you'd be very correct in making that connection, because only by getting through this strange, misty land, cough, cough, Trevenant, can you then find yourself in the Illumina spot. There are also plenty of alternative routes here that represent the 4 seasons, and this isn't just a small change. We are talking full-blown winter wonderland and arid summer within these Halloween forests, that you pass through the misty area, then you get to the next season. Throughout these forests, we can find a slew of guardians once more, such as, again, Trevenant, who will even allow another little friend known as Esper to jump onto its head. The Esper watch you from a number of different areas as well. They fly around with their psychic powers and can be triggered to do so if you bother them. Otherwise, you'll even find one, or actually multiple, moving a rock with their powers. And while it isn't a guardian, it is stated that the Esper are here to gain a better control of their psychic powers. This makes perfect sense, because if they were to lose control, they would release energy in a blast radius of 300 feet or 90 meters. They need to also consistently release energy as a whole, or else they might just pass out, which then they just explode with energy again, and this is just kind of a catch-22. This is a huge issue. Though by understanding this, we can then understand why it has such a friendly relationship with the Trevenant here, because Trevenant will resist this psychic power if something goes wrong, while also continuing to guard this childlike small Pokemon that Trevenant is apt to protect. In this foggy route, we also see Shiftry either sleeping, conversing with each other, or simply running around the area. These are marked up as another guardian of the forests who will typically scare away intruders, yet not even after bothering them excessively do they seem to mind our presence. I really tried, because there is said, through one of the many guides I had to look at, that they might raise their gusts when we interrupt the one we do see sleeping on the branch and then fill it with energy through orbing it, yet it never happened for me. It'll also appear later on if you find yourself in summer or spring routes. The Photodex does add to its authority, stating that the other Pokemon in the woods revere Shiftry as a forest guardian. The Kecleon that we've talked about are found everywhere except in the wintry route, because, I mean, they are a cold-blooded creature after all, meaning that they wouldn't survive those conditions. But that will be our first sign that all of this, despite the slew of psychic Pokemon and the mist that is created by Trevenant, that this is all real, that it is not an illusion. Our second sign is coming into contact with the many deerling and saucebug that we find. They not only move about, eating grass in different sections, but they also bear all 4 of their seasonal forms. These forms are stated to entirely depend on this season, which is understandable because we see the way the plant life on their head or even their fur adapts to the climate or weather. But most interesting of all is that you can find all 4 seasons arriving in the same spot towards the end of a route where light trickles down from above onto an area seemingly touched by all 4 seasons in their own sections coming together. And when I first saw this, I was baffled. I mean, just absolutely shocked. And that's a lot of my reaction for most of this region, for most of the encounters that we see here. I have teared up so many times writing this or experiencing those little moments, mainly because I love nature and any depiction of it. But this is our second sign that this is no illusion. I honestly, though, would openly bet that this is, of course, a land that has been modified by a great level of power. What that power is, I know and will reveal later. Another Pokemon found on all 4 seasonal paths is Unpheasant, a Pokemon that is stated to be a symbol of peace. And while they may represent peace, they are still birds that will have a rivalry, as per their ability, with the same gender and fight each other for mates. Alternatively, we even get to see a mini mating ritual as the male and female Unpheasant can be seen dancing with one another. And what I love is that in the summer path specifically, we can find a female sitting on a nest of eggs. It gets angry if we bother it, so does the male. And while I haven't done a lot of real life animal science here, when we look at real life pheasants, they have an incubation period of roughly April 1st to August 1st, essentially from late spring through summer, matching up perfectly with our pheasant's Pokemon here and why it has eggs in the summertime. To be entirely fair, a lot of animals will just simply have babies in periods or after periods of great food supply. After all, you need a lot of energy to make babies, not just the process of doing it, and you need to be able to provide a lot of energy to the babies once they are born. And food is the #1 way to provide those needs. It's also very cute that the photodex does state male and female Unpheasants work together to raise their young. One goes out in search of food, while the other stays back at the nest to protect their eggs. Yet another thing we would otherwise never know from any other source of Pokemon media whatsoever. Ready for more Guardians of the Forest? Because Drampa has arrived, appearing in the Foggy section, Summer section, and the End routes. It floats about, and there's really only 2 interactions with it. One where you simply provided energy, and then you're supposed to be able to see it carrying Bulbasaur and Pancham on its back. My RNG not working in my favor, but the second interaction being when it lands to let them off. If you throw fruit at it, Drampa will get angry at you. So somehow I would manage to get that interaction, but never saw it carrying our baby or Pokemon. At any other point or moment, if you throw anything at Drampa, it just doesn't care. Only in this exact moment have you incurred its wrath. And that is simply because it is known to be very friendly and protective of children, of which Bulbasaur and Pancham are. So be prepared, because you decided to threaten it when it has children near it, and it is known to burn down bullies' houses. Speaking of the summer path, there are bamboo growing in the area, which at least explains Pancham's appearance here, as that is part of its primary diet. Otherwise, it is also found frolicking about with no extra interactions, -1. Because through the photodex, it states that Pancham imitate other Pokemon to learn how to grow strong. They may be easily distracted, but they train hard under Shiftry's instruction, and you can watch exactly that happening, as you can orb a Shiftry and Pancham, and the Pancham will gain the energy to just kind of throw fists towards some bamboo, and the Shiftry seems to be a lot happier. This is very essential information, because we don't get to see Pangoro at all on any of the islands which it is said to imitate, and Pancham can only evolve through leveling up and being around other Dark-type Pokemon. This means that Shiftry are essentially raising the next generation of Guardians to the Forest, further cementing why they are revered highly here. I would also like to see, in some capacity, Pancham who, when raised around other Dark-type Pokemon, might actually get their physical attributes. Like, let's say it was a Mightyena, then maybe it has shaggier mane of fur. Give the Pancham a mullet, I guess. But that aside, we move on into our autumn section. Significant encounters include Serperior, who once again also appears at the main ending route. You can feed it, you can lull it back to sleep with music, nothing too crazy here. We also get to see another form of Vivillon when we startle them out of their spot, but a fun interaction is finding Applin here within piles of leaves or hanging from trees. You can bother them to lure them out of their mini homes, and you can even cause a deerling to mistakenly believe that Applin is just an ordinary apple before the little Pokemon retaliates. Very similarly to what we see if a Lechonk tries to eat an Appleton or anyone else that it doesn't want trying to eat it. In a number of routes, we do find Beware. It hibernates in the winter route, but if we find it in one of the end routes, we can bother it excessively, just pelting it with apples until you are faced with the horror of not just watching one Beware, as I thought. So when I was reshooting this, I had never gotten this. So I thought just one Beware would chase me with its arms up in the air. And I was like, oh, that's cute, whatever, so be it. Until later on, all of the other Pokemon stop trying to follow you or interact with you, and you see a horde of Beware chase you all the way until the end of the route, and they do not stop until you start floating in the air, and at that point, they continue to stare at you. They are hunting us, scaring us away. Now, you might not think that that is scary, but I want you to remember that Beware are one of the most dangerous Pokemon in Alola. They're incredibly intelligent. They have the ability to run across water. They can fight Ultra Beasts, keeping up with Pheromosa's speed, and you can somehow believe that the Neo one is supposed to keep you safe. You're lucky that you aren't treated like a baseball and just batted out of this island, let alone the region as a whole. This is also the perfect opportunity, and I know I mentioned it earlier, to thank Muse Art World, as I commissioned her for the thumbnail of this video, and I love how it turned out as always. I don't get to commission her often, but I do want to change that, because I make the thumbnails, but through your support, I've been able to start commissioning for thumbnails, and by doing that, it means I can put more love and effort into the scripting and editing, because otherwise I do literally everything else for these videos. Now, there are, of course, two other significant Pokemon in that thumbnail, other than Beware, that I will talk about later. But a final wild thing about this is that you can get a photo of Beware with its eyes closed. And if you manage to do that, it results in a 4-star photo. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal, but Beware and Stuffle are based on stuffed toy Pokemon, and they seem to never blink whatsoever, while even being weak to fire moves and taking half damage from direct contact moves, you know, like punching a pillow. So, them never blinking is assumed to just be a thing until now. And we just kind of have the winter route to really focus on before we dig into our special guests. Otherwise, we just briefly mention Magikarp and Lotad. And, I mean, who am I kidding? We all know Lotad is a special guest everywhere we go. How can we not love them? In this winter wonderland, there is a Gardevoir that will teleport around as it plays with Deerling. And this is where that RNG really comes in again. And if your luck stays strong and you do this right, you can either assist with the playing and make it be this beautiful icy tree by the end, or you can manage to gain the absolute ire and wrath of the Ninetales watching you from afar. If you don't help with the grand finale of Gardevoir, instead stopping 1 or 2 steps beforehand, you feed the Deerling and then interrupt their feeding by throwing an apple at their big old noggins, effectively bullying them and resulting in the Guardian Ninetales appearing before you, teleporting, and then amassing its foxfires to curse you for bullying the poor Deerling. I don't know how effective the Neo one is at keeping us safe from a curse, and I really don't want to find out. But now, we can talk about what are effectively the 2 most important Pokemon of this forest, beginning with that Espeon that you have seen time and time and time again appearing at the end of routes or around the routes in general and seemingly guiding you to your destination. Now, it's here that I really need to say the reason why the Illumina Pokemon appear before us, and the lore reason is simply because we are stated to truly love Pokemon, that we see them as equals and enjoy their company unlike any other person who has visited these islands does. We aren't just here to photograph these creatures or trying to see the cool Pokemon we really want to see. We are praised as a person who wants to see and enjoy the company of all Pokemon of these islands, to be a part of them, of their ecosystem, to see them in their natural habitat, to enjoy them. And this is why so many events happen now that we, as the player character, are now in Lental. Even the professor realizes this. So with this understanding, we can then see why Espeon, amongst many of the other Pokemon we have talked about, the other Guardians, are so happy to not only let us through these woods, but even guide us through the Lost Woods. Why the Trevenants do not trap us here. Why Shiftry doesn't just send us to Oz with a whirlwind. And it's all because we are meant to be a person who truly loves Pokemon. And so we are guided to a treasure that no other can see, being not only the Illumina Pokemon, but also a Pokemon that only shows itself in the times of peace, in areas of peace. A Pokemon regarded as a prosperous light that gives hope to us that a bright future is still in store for the world of Pokemon. The Time Guardian known as Celebi, because yes, it is here that you can encounter Celebi at the ruins, something that is stated to be a very special place to it. But more than this, through enough playing with Celebi, you can trigger a stunning event in which the many Celebi from across timelines appear before you, before dancing and flying away together. From beginning to end, this forest is filled with guardians, parental figures of younger Pokemon, and the four seasons. And while Melodic may be at the epicenter of this, exuding a wave of peace to the Pokemon of the island, it is Celebi who I am sure is bestowing these woods with their eternal seasons. If we see seasons as time, then we can make the fair assumption that Celebi, in its influence, whether by accident or on purpose, has frozen specific areas of this forest in time. Alternatively, each of these areas may be experiencing time in separate ways, similar to how seasons are different in different hemispheres. And it is only through this understanding of how time behaves differently in sections of these woods that you can become lost in, that we can understand how four seasons can exist not only in these same general woods, but in the same exact area at the end route as well. A forest found elsewhere beyond space and time. Mighty Wide River is a nutrient-rich river that flows throughout the entire island. And if it weren't for the rock in this area being of a higher durability, that little bend that I'm showing you would have been separated as an oxbow lake. An oxbow lake is a U-shaped body of water that forms when the stream is cut off from the main flow. That isn't to say that it's impossible, but with the rock still standing so well in that area, it may never actually happen, meaning this may always stay a beautiful winding river, ending in a waterfall, distributing massive amounts of water in the process. Many different Pokemon reside here. Vivillon, Metapod, who can be startled by Arbok only to harden in self-defense, and they just shine like they just got rubbed in oil. Should not say that about something that hardens. No. They're just trying to bide their time as best they can and wait for their evolution into Butterfree after all, which we don't see Butterfree at any point. But either way, I'll also note that I love that Snap's Dex entries state that Metapod's cells are being completely rebuilt, which apparently does actually show up in all the other Dex entries. But nevertheless, I'm going to still talk about it because that is essentially what exactly happens to insects going under this chrysalis metamorphosis in real life. It's still such a strange phenomena that, as I understand it from the scientists who actually studied it, we don't fully understand how that even developed in nature. After all, your entire body becoming soup with only a single cell or nucleus being left behind and rebuilding yourself from scratch is a wild adaptation. We do find Apom here who love to run around, and when they're introduced to other Pokemon, they might either chase them in curiosity, bother them, or simply accompany them. They cling to ceilings and will happily stand before Tropius as they await for it to share its sweet fruit with it, Grookey, and Sobble. We'll find Beautifly flying throughout the route, simply enjoying the area, and likely searching for flowers to extract pollen and sweet nectar from. Though we finally get a Pokemon that can be seen as antagonistic, but has a complete twist in what you would expect, something that I hinted on at the beginning. because when Psyduck is being bullied by the trio of Aipom, who are then scared away by a very aggressive and loud Ursaring, Arbok, if orbed early on as it was swimming in the river, will actually appear to defend Psyduck, a Pokemon that we know should absolutely be devouring Psyduck or any other Pokemon that moves and is made of meat. Arbok opts to actually protect Psyduck, even using its tail to intimidate the Ursaring, slamming it down in the area in front of it, and then it will later, after having saved the Psyduck and they walk away all cute and happily smiling together, you will find them sleeping, cuddling together at the end of the route. They're gay lovers in my eyes. They are both female, as we can see when we look at them closer with our camera, and this is just a forbidden tale of love almost ruined by Ursaring, which, as a last note, I would love to imagine the Arbok as the lady, fierce, powerful, and very protective of her own goofy lady, Psyduck. They do share an egg group, by the way. Moving on, that Ursaring I mentioned is absolutely looking for a meal. We know this because it will catch Magikarp trying to make their way up a waterfall, no differently than a bear catching salmon upstream. Though you can ruin this and help the Magikarp fight back, or even just cause Ursaring to fall in surprise, especially when it's kind of sleeping on a branch over the water, which Arbok can also be seen sleeping on. And there are tiny details that I just kind of, again, don't really mention all the time, but Ursaring is shown, or at least an example of it is shown, where there are claw marks on a tree in that section where we find the Arbok, Psyduck, and Aipom interaction. Those claws are Ursaring marking its territory, which marking territory is done by a number of different animals. That's why animals may urinate in a certain area, they claw in a certain area, or there are bucks that will grind their antlers against trees, and that is how they mark as well. There's a slew of different methods, and there are animals that just kind of do it all. Other Pokemon flying high in the sky include Toucanon, which can be attracted to the crystal blooms in mass and are otherwise wholly undisturbed by anything unless you cause Drillbur to appear next to one due to playing music. And while we don't see them here, Toucanon do live in these jungly areas because they enjoy fruit, primarily feeding on the Bounsweet line, which are the ones that we don't see here, as these birds are the only known Pokemon to be able to break through their harder rinds. They're likely here as a nesting area or simply because there is a bountiful amount of water. It is also very cute to note that anytime Toucanon smack their beaks together, it's directly noted that they are not fighting, they are simply telling each other how they feel. I tried to figure out if this was part of a mating ritual with them, and while I couldn't find anything reliably conclusive, I did find out that a male will pass females, in terms of the actual toucans, food by throwing the fruit between each other before nesting high in a canopy, and that is a toucan's mating ritual. I'm just gonna go start throwing food at my fiance as part of a courtship ritual now. The idea of humans just doing some more of these more specific courtship rituals of animals is pretty funny to me. Just like that bird that yells so loud that it will actually deafen their selected mate. Otherwise, humans do kind of do a lot of mating, rituals, dancing, singing, dressing up really nice, you name it. We are animals in the end. Other things with the Toucanon is that they really like music. They don't like the sound of the scanner, which a lot of Pokemon may react to the scanner or the music. Moving on though, the Drillbur we see appear in groups throughout the route, tunneling, appearing near other Pokemon, and are otherwise seemingly very motivated by music. The holes that they make will likely ensure that if a great rainfall does occur, the area doesn't completely flood. Alternatively, they are slowly but surely reshaping the environment itself with additional effects of their actions falling onto how the river itself moves. And I have to make a note because I don't really care for Drillbur. I don't really care for its design all that much, but seeing it in 3D, seeing it in such a small Pokemon in this game makes it look so adorable. I just want to pick one up and squish it. It's that internal instinct of, it's so cute, I now need to just hydraulic press this thing into nothingness. Of course, moving on from that horrifying image, we get to see the boy here. Not my boy, not my Gengar, but instead we see Wooper and Quagsire. They make friends with other Pokemon and just kind of do what we would expect them to do, hiding away, sleeping, keeping themselves moist, and this is a perfect place to do so, especially as Quagsire in particular kind of just floats about lazily and keeps its mouth open in hopes that something falls in. After all, it is a jungle, meaning we can expect humidity for that moisture of its skin as well, which in turn means that Wooper and Quagsire can stay out of the water longer and run around as they may wish. You can even get Wooper to jump out and greet Tropius, further resulting with it on Tropius's head as it then flies away. All within eyeshot of where Quagsire will eventually be found after its own travels, sleeping near Swampert. I will say this is pretty brave of Wooper since it is stated to be a very timid Pokemon and typically sticks close to Quagsire. It's also noted that you should never touch them because the poisonous goo that covers their body and helps them stay moist will cause your hand to sting. I imagine it's like touching stinging nettle, which isn't a fun feeling, but it isn't that bad to me at the very least. Then again, I also fell 10 feet into a river with only the stinging nettle to grab on both arms to stop me from actually crashing down into the river. My arms, by the way, up to my elbow were all affected to the point where I did not feel a single lick of the itching. Those Tropius I also mentioned are just living their best life. We often find them in tropical environments within the world of Pokemon, blending in with the jungles and chowing down on their favorite fruits, only to grow the same fruits on their bodies. I do have to question sometimes what the effect of that is. I imagine Tropius mate like an animal and would not mate like a plant. And then from there, they'd serve as a way for the fruits that they eat to survive extinction events like blight or even provide special mutations to help fight against disease in general, while also spreading these seeds into the jungle and actually reflourishing the jungle year after year. Lots of possibilities and questions that we will likely never get answers to. For Swampert, there is a group of them sleeping in one area, but otherwise they need orbs to be encouraged to surface from any areas we find them in under the water, in which they'll just kind of jump out from. It's noted their powerful vision allows them to see through muddy river water, and it covers itself in mud when on land to keep its skin moist. It excels in swimming, of course, but there's nothing that states what its diet is at all or why it's swimming. We can assume a number of things, and I would like to assume it's swimming after Magikarp, as many of our other swimming larger Pokemon are, but could also be using that muddy eyesight to its advantage to scavenge the riverbed for some goodies. At the very least, considering Swampert really only muddy themselves up and sleep on land when they're exhausted, we can make another assumption that they are simply enjoying being here where they can have fun swimming against the current of this mighty river. Something similar can actually be said about Feraligatr, considering it has very similar habits in this area and can be found resting with some of these larger Pokemon peacefully. The Psyduck we mentioned earlier can be helped without the Arbok as it escapes the Aipom, giving it an orb to allow it to run faster, or using Confusion against the Ursaring, harming it enough to make it run away. Otherwise, this little ducky is just trying to live its best life in this jungle. There is one other event where apparently you can cause it to use its telekinesis to lift a Magikarp up, which would make sense. I mean, you know, ducks can eat fish, so it clears. Cleffa may appear out of the grass after throwing several orbs or playing a melody, depending on the location of the route, but of course, their chaotic little selves will summon, or have the chance to summon, a whole tornado through the use of Metronome, as if the jungle needed that destruction at any point. But to finalize the daytime here, we see Gyarados appearing when the Crystal Bloom behind the waterfall is activated. Another nod to the Magikarp that make it to the top of the waterfall and evolve into Gyarados. Though to make things terrifying on level 2 and above, after the last Crystal Bloom is illuminated and you reach the end of the route, you will see that giant serpent leaping at the Neo 1 as though it was trying to kill us. Otherwise, we'd be waiting for the Gyarados to pass what I assume is the indigestible Neo 1 through its bowels, and we witness a whole new kind of cave opening that I don't want to see. At night, it really isn't all that different. Many of the Pokemon active during the day might still be found being active here at night, but we get a better understanding of some prey and predator interactions. For example, the Magikarp will stay on land if Feraligatr is in the water, or how Aipom will now be on the branch Feraligatr was sleeping on before we caused it to jump into the water. The Ariados can now be seen being active as they are noted to be nocturnal creatures, and while they aren't hunting here, they likely will be soon enough. Even the Dex actually helps confirm that it continues to do so even in this seemingly peaceful lands, as it states Aridos spins silk from both its rear and its mouth. It uses the silk to build its web and catch prey. If it's not on its web, you can bet it's wandering around somewhere searching for food. We could probably assume that since Pokemon such as Wooper are now staying closer to Quagsire, now that it's nighttime, that they are one of the potential targets of Aridos and need extra protection. There are Morlul that simply line the riverbanks, and they don't seem to do much, but they serve as regulators of the ecosystem in a really cool way, because they will absorb life force from others, which they, in turn, can release into the plant life or other Pokemon in the area. Said life force is shown in the anime to be no different than general energy that is gained when somebody eats. With that, I'd like to imagine that if any Pokemon become too destructive or an intruder appears, the Morlul will attack them while they rest and restore balance to this area. One Pokemon they seem to be friendly with is not only Wooper, as it, smiles and cutely waddles by in the very beginning of the route, but also with Tropius, as they may appear near it while it sleeps. Ledian now join along, flying around in different areas, very shining and beautiful, glowing as they release these particles from their bodies, or they're hiding behind vines before the entrance to the moonlit cave. They're just kind of soaking up all that good starlight, as their dex says, which gives them energy. And similarly to our rabbits, apparently alligators are very active mostly at dusk and dawn, which explains why Feraligatr is moving around again, but we can also watch as one also decides it's a great time to hit the hay. Otherwise, you can see it very early on being very cute to some capacity after it tries to scare us, and then it kind of just sits alongside Quagsire in the water unless we bother them. The remainder of our Pokemon here are simple, acting similarly to their daytime habits, though there are at least two last interactions I want to mention here, one being that when Cleffa are boosted with orbs in the Moonlit Cave, they'll dance, of course being a classic bit of our Pokemon's lore. But more interestingly, when you trigger the Feraligatr and you find those Magikarp staying away, you can wake them up with a melody and by scanning. Then after illuminating the crystal bloom, you will cause a Gyarados to appear and climb the waterfall in all its glory. Unless you're me, and then you manage to just not be able to do that over and over again, but you can at least cause the Gyarados in the daytime to appear at the end route repeatedly. But continuing on our nighttime here, further than this, when we look at the shape of the rocky cliff, the professor makes a comment about how there's a gash in the cliff. So who could have done that? Well, after this event, he does confirm that Gyarados is so powerful that it changed the topography of this area. We already suspected Gyarados could cause immense destruction, since it does state that it would rampage until everything is destroyed in its wake. But to understand truly that it can change the environment itself, more than just houses or trees, but full-on rock getting ground away in an instant, just goes to show how much of an impact Gyarados has on its environment. Welcome to Founja Jungle, a place where we see many of the previous Pokemon we have mentioned, of course, but it's here that it seems that Melodic's waves of anti-strife seem to not have their full effect, at least to my understanding. I'll spare you the repeat Pokemon and begin just listing them off a little bit quicker to save us time from the unnecessary repeating. Vivillon, Magikarp, Aipom, and then that sweet treat that Toucannon seeks is also here all over the beginning area, Bounsweet. They're flying or rolling about the route, simply soaking up the sun and avoiding any predators, or just kind of spending some time with them because most other Pokemon don't really care that they exist because they can't eat them. There are also plenty of Metapod and Beautyfly on tree trunks, though those little monarchs have the opportunity to be seen inspecting Venusaur's flower very closely. It is stated that Beautyfly is feeding on pollen from Venusaur's flower, keeping it healthy and maybe even helping it reproduce. Its scent is also stated to soothe the Pokemon around it, especially as the smaller Pokemon by the waterside are noted to be more relaxed and comfortable as they played with it. In other words, even far out this way, we do find ourselves with yet another guardian of the forest. Admittedly, it's not that incredible of a guardian here, as there is an Arbok seen seemingly hunting down a Wooper, and by seemingly I mean quite literally hunting down a Wooper as it is cornered, and Venusaur is also scared away by Arbok at one point. It'll then appear near the pool of water later, and after powering up the friends there with a crystal bloom, the Sobble there will get Venusaur all acclimated to the temperature of the water by spraying it before it takes a big old jump into the pool. It is a frog after all, but it's very strange to finally see Venusaur diving into a pool of water and enjoying it. As a quick note for Arbok here, it can be seen sleeping high in a tree at night. This is likely to try and avoid any other Pokemon preying upon it while it rests, as there are Ariados in the area. But back to daytime, there are Pikipek throughout the route, flying around or pecking at tree trunks, and unlike regular woodpeckers, it is often stated that Pikipek only eats berries or Bounsweet, but they will peck away at Metapod. I've always personally stated that this is primarily just a way for them to increase the durability of their beaks, but I could be wrong. Which brings me to a really important point. I'm one person. Odds are I missed something, which I definitely am leaving things out. But if there's something that you disagree with, tell me about it in the comments if you have the evidence for it. I want good detail in the comments. Or if you just want to talk about your favorite encounter that you see in Pokemon Snap, tell me about it. Not only do I love reading the comments when I do have the time to do so, but I also will let you know that comments and watch time are the #1 free way to help boost a channel. Speaking on Pikipek again, the many holes that we see in trees are likely caused by it, as it creates storage for its food. These trees may eventually pass away from losing bark and being exposed to the elements, or they may be further used by other Pokemon who do need a home. Either way, it helps ensure that the dead trees fall, or trees will eventually fall if they're diseased and don't cause disease to other trees, and then will then help fertilize the earth. And above the ruins that we see, you can find Toucanon just waiting in a nest for its babies to come home. Some quick notes though would include a Slacking who can be occasionally woken up, once again unless you're me, and is otherwise likely only eating the grass in its immediate area, as Slacking are apt to do. You can make a Sobble cry by throwing fruit at it, and then there are our jungle cats roaming around known as Liepard. They can be seen sleeping on a rock near a waterfall at the end of the route, with also other Pokemon that you would expect it to eat. They seem to not have a care in the world and are unbothered by the other residents of the forest during the day. It's also here at this waterfall that we see a slew of Wooper and Quagsire who are mostly just enjoying the pool of water. But you can help Wooper and Bounsweet meet each other as friends throughout the encouragement of throwing fruit and playing music. And then there's the last Pokemon of this area during the day, Leafeon. They are found near the ruins or behind the waterfall. They'll make friends with Sobble, and when it is crying, it'll roll around as though to say, hey, everything's okay, and try to get it to stop crying. Kind of like how you would, make a little kid laugh or do something silly to make them smile. And Leafeon living in a jungle makes a lot of sense considering there must be plenty of nutrients and sunlight to spur on the growth of all these plants, which is something that is directly seen or stated, such as when we read about Mighty Wide River. And so a Leafeon making its home here does make perfect sense. That, and there's probably a mossy rock somewhere around here, unless you consider the ruins a mossy rock, which I guess it could. I didn't mention it, but during the day we do find Yanmega quickly moving about, though it is at night that we can not only see them sleeping and wake them up, but we can also follow one and play music to attract its attention towards Ariados, unless you're me, because I never really got to see it for some odd reason. This, though, results in us being able to choose which one wins the fight by orbing our favored victor, whether it be Ariados retaliating with a web attack, then teaming up on it, or Yanmega striking in its own right. And if you do choose Yanmega, then it will reappear with several other Yanmega and fly across the sky. Both of these Pokemon are voracious predators, Ariados wanting to catch any prey it can, and occasionally releasing them just to follow them to their families. Yanmega being a Pokemon whose gusts can destroy trees and cause great harm just by flying. Its bites are incredibly targeted and specific, as it flies at high speeds and aims to defeat foes with a single hit. In other words, these are our most aggressive Pokemon of this area, and despite the islands being mostly safe, each area, as we are going through, you'll notice, seems to have some other Pokemon to help control populations. These Pokemon are one of those controls. There's also one of those most beautiful scenes in this game, as with the tree in which we have seen Toucanon and its Pikipek rest, at night, you can cause the entire tree to be illuminated, and there's particles that just float through the air, and it is just a sight to behold. And I admit, this is such a pristine and beautiful moment that I just kind of wish I had the opportunity to see such a thing in person, but then I'd also be afraid that I'd be somehow destroying something by being there. Otherwise, these Morlo roam about, walking on their mycelium legs, and if you're like me, you can throw fruit at them to topple them all over, or play music that makes the Leafeon here run in circles only to bump into them and knock them all over anyway. Oops. I have to admit that while I was live streaming and my playthrough of this game and trying to dig into as much of the ecology I could live, I got made fun of a lot by my audience for constantly just berating Pokemon with fruit. It kind of got to the point where we started joking that I was accidentally causing the death of a lot of Pokemon. The remainder of our interactions are pretty simple. You can get Ledian to dance through enough steps. Slacking will take fruit that Pikipek gathered, as it is now walking around at night, and you can gather the Liepard and get them to stand on their hind legs. Leafeon continues to stroll on the path at night and sleep amongst a pair of Swampert, but before then, we can cause an Ariados to drop from above and potentially scare Leafeon. There are spiders that eat some leaves or plants, and despite Leafeon's cells now being exactly that of plant cells, it would be fair to assume that a Pokemon would mistake it for a mammal and attack if they'd imagine it would be a tasty meal. Through this, we could say that Ariados may have tried hunting Leafeon in the past, though even if you manage to cause Bounsweet to land in Ariados' web, or it does so accidentally, it will primarily just move to scare the little Pokemon, and then yeet them out of the web rather than trying to keep them there or attack them at all. So it's probably not interested in any of the plant Pokemon. But the final Pokemon that I have to talk about that I should have mentioned during the daytime, but I really wanted to keep until now, is number 151 itself, Mew. And it is a Pokemon that moves around so incredibly fast, one that you have to throw fruit at time and time again, and the first time I managed to complete the event, it jump scared me like the little devil it is. And to explain that little clip, that resulted in me simultaneously throwing fruit and taking a picture at the same time, and completely ruining my chance of getting the 4-star photo the first time around. But of all places it could be, Mew is here. And there's only one reason that this should click for you, because Mew was originally stated to be found in a forest within South America, though that little bit of lore has since seemed to be retconned so that way they can separate our world from the world of Pokemon more, which is why I say the world of Pokemon, because they never call it Earth. Though even with the ruins here, I wouldn't say this is Mew's home. Instead, it feels more like a familiar place to it, as it takes refuge in it on occasion. It does say, at least through the photodex, that it lives hidden in the ruins, so who knows how far that goes. Does it live here permanently? Does it live here on migration? We just don't know, and we may never find out. I hope you don't have, a fear of deep water, or thalassophobia for that matter, because we're diving into the seafloor of Lental. Now, Maricopia itself is derived from copia, meaning abundance, like cornucopia, as you may have been familiarized with copia in another word. And who better to represent an abundance of Pokemon than Wishy-Washy itself as our Illumina Pokemon? They shift between their two forms throughout your time here, swimming away and returning as their school form, which then results in them performing a variety of actions. Whirlpools, loops, swallowing the Neo one, and yes, you are kept in its mouth for some time, which is a little scary at first, but at the same time, it's not really able to eat us. It's a bunch of little fish, put together, and you might witness it chasing away a Wailord, unless you're me. This one might be the strangest Illumina Pokemon to me, because you have to orb the individual Wishy-Washy in their schools, and only after giving enough of them energy do they form together to the school form Wishy-Washy. The professor talks about this as well, saying that there really is a connection between their behavior and the Illumina phenomenon, which you might be thinking, no duh, but this allows us to confirm it, as just because there is a correlation does not mean there is always causation. What that means is just because two things are related to each other, it does not mean that they are like actually causing each other to happen, or one is not actually causing the other. My assumption is that the Wishy-Washy are able to form a much larger school version of themselves through the collected energy, because otherwise the Wishy-Washy here don't seem to be larger than your average one, or at least they don't seem to be. They're normally roughly 10 inches long, or roughly 0.2 meters, and I can't really measure one in front of me in real life, so I can't know for sure, and we don't have other Wishy-Washy in the game to compare them through, like, their pixels. Either way, even if they are larger, it is through their connection to Illumina energy that their behavior is influenced. To add to this, this connection is understood by knowing Wishy-Washy are stated to only form a school when they feel threatened. And let me tell you, they are not feeling threatened here. Not in this point in time, at least. But what stumped me for the longest is how Wishy-Washy proceeds to influence the life of these islands. And it might be simpler than our previous two Illumina Pokemon. Abundance is the theme of this island, and of all places in the entirety of this game, the Maricopia Islands are arguably the place where it has the highest number of Pokemon. I'm not talking about highest variation, which it kinda does also. I'm talking about the most life overall. There are high numbers of every single Pokemon all around us throughout the entirety of our travels here. And so it's time I talk about some of the additional friends we find in this Illumina area. Now, I've already mentioned Whale Lord, who may occasionally appear towards the end of the route and chase the solo form Wishy-Washy, only to be chased off by the school form in return. And despite this, Whale Lord is noted to have no natural enemies here in Lental and just simply loves to play. Though I'm not sure I trust that, considering they are known to eat Wishy-Washy. On the opposite end of this, though, literally as we look at the start of the route, there are Whalmer that appear. They don't serve much purpose here, but only in the Snap Decks does it state that they like to startle other Pokemon and play pranks on them, which keep that in mind for later. Otherwise, the only other two here are Lovedisc, noted to rest between the branches of Corsola for protection as their normal Dex entry state, and Finian, whose tail is shown to nicely light up from time to time as they've stored sunlight in their bodies during the day. I also will probably forget to mention it later because it's not in my script, but you can actually see Luminian's fins light up as well, which is something that is not often seen or mentioned in a lot of Pokemon media. The thing about this area, though, is that it is also very, very dark. Without the Neo 1, there's likely no light besides the little specks of bioluminescence that we do see. I also am assuming that the bioluminescent flowing around in the water is plankton or bioluminescent algae, because we do see a bunch of like specks on walls in different parts of the Maricopia underwater, and that has to be algae, I at least assume. And we can safely make this assumption about the bioluminescence because there are a slew of Pokemon that we find here that are filter feeders or bottom feeders. And then you can begin to understand why these Pokemon are here. They are Pokemon that are more easily vulnerable, Pokemon that can perceive their surroundings without seeing them, or they are able to release light from their bodies which allow them to see. I also want to note that abundance may also mean one more thing: more food. You see, Wishy-Washy are effectively at the bottom and the top of the food chain, a really unique creature all in all. When in solo form, it is one of the most eaten Pokemon across all walks of life. But when it reaches that school form, it is able to scare away both Wailord and Gyarados with ease. So there is, of course, the chance that through this abundance of life, it itself may be supporting the lives of all other Pokemon, allowing each species of Pokemon the opportunity to have much larger populations as we see throughout these waters. Though I'm not going to explain it now, I am going to immediately counter-argue that idea and concept and state that these Wishy-Washy never get eaten. And we'll talk about why, again, towards the end of this video. Also, it wasn't until I completely got done with this whole island that I went back to double check my work and realized that the island description flat out states that the islands are warm waters and hold an abundance of food, which allows it to be a paradise for coastal Pokemon, which I'm happy I came to the same conclusion. as the actual lore of the place and its description, but my life would have been a lot easier if I had just read that off at the beginning. Here on the seafloor, we have Finian, Magikarp, and Lovedisk returning, the last of which can be influenced to form a 4-leafed clover through crystal blooms, which is cute. I'm also going to skip over Pokemon we see by looking up at the surface of the water because, trust me, we'll talk about them later. On rocky ledges nearby, we will also find Corsola hanging around, filter feeding, and being all happy, attesting to the health of these waters. Even a Pelipper is one of the very first Pokemon that you will notice, depending on the level, as it dives into the waters, kicking its flippers in the process as it attempts to scoop up some fish Pokemon for a meal. Alamamala float about the routes, and they are a Pokemon that is likely also helping with ensuring populations of resident Pokemon are being kept nice and healthy, as they do have a mucus on their bodies that they will freely use on other Pokemon to help restore said health. Though we do have a problem, because Magikarp, Alamamala, and even Lantern are visibly seen becoming the prey of Frillish in the area, being held close to them as the Frillish smile and attempt to drag them deep down in the depths below. You can, of course, save them through the use of either orbs or Fluffroot, making the Frillish sad to lose a meal, but by saving Lantern, you are happily led to a treasure unlike any other. But I'll just tease you for now, and we'll come back to what that treasure is later. Instead, we will follow the main routes where we can find Squirtle among the seaweed interacting with other Pokemon. I also wouldn't be surprised if we found out it was eating the seaweed as well. What we do know, though, especially as it becomes more relevant in a different route, is that Squirtle doesn't just bask in the sun to dry off its shell. It's also absorbing nutrients to help it grow strong. It's still weak for now, though, so it often needs friends like Lapras to rescue it, which I dug really deep after reading that Photodex entry, and I could not find anything at all about turtles in the real world doing this. There were a lot of blogs that tried to suggest this, but they didn't really have any reputable sources, and it seems like they might have just been piggybacking on each other for information, going off a hearsay, or just making things up because they can. Nevertheless, in this area at a higher level, we'll encounter a whole cradle of Cradily. Yes, that is what I'm calling a group of Cradily, slowly moving themselves around. They dance to music, extend their necks, and may even get angry if Fluffroot is thrown at them. They would typically be extending those pink tentacles out in order to grab prey and just dissolve them with their acid, but we don't really get to see any of that here. Not that I necessarily want to see that. That feels incredibly gruesome to see visually, and I imagine it would be similar to that one scene we see in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which, who in my audience is even old enough to remember that? That movie is like 10 years before my time. It came out in 1988, but gosh, is it one of the best classic movies out there. Never will we ever see anything like that ever again, by the way. But mini tangent aside, that probably made some of you feel really old. We will eventually see more of our beautiful underwater paradise and witness a Wailmer playing one of its pranks. It slowly approaches an Octillery just to yell at it, which then results in Octillery running away and just jumping off the ledge in fear, which really isn't much of a prank. It's a lot more like causing an innate sense of dread within a Pokemon as it wonders if you're going to eat it whole. Alternatively, though, you may witness a Pyukumuku in the place of the Octillery, and the scream from this Wailmer will send that little sea cucumber blasting off at the speed of light. Poor thing, Pyukumuku typically just stays in one spot once they find the place they like and filter feed until there's nothing left to eat. Then they just wither away. That Wailmer may have actually saved that Pyukumuku's life, or sent it onto land, which we'll talk about again later. Also, on level 3, when I was getting footage for this, or trying to get footage for this, the Wailmer instead rose and faced towards us, and then just yelled at us and then laughed afterwards because it was trying to scare us, which, yeah, I guess that's a little cute. As we reach the end of the main routes, you'll likely have already noticed some Pokemon I didn't mention as always, and that's because they become more significant through the alternate route. And as we rise up to the end of the main route, we will travel through either a grouping of Tentacruel or a grouping of the Frillish. That's what they're called. They're called Frillish. Which, either way, with either of them, it's incredibly terrifying considering they're noted to pretty much eat any fish that are within reach. more specifically Tentacruel, and that if there's no other fish in an area, you should watch out because it likely means that there's a horde of Tentacruel nearby, and there are no other fish in this area when they're there, which, coincidence? I think not. They will react, or at least the Tentacruel will react anytime you use your scanner, but are otherwise pretty docile. It's noted in the photo decks that they use ultrasonic waves to investigate their surroundings and emit light from their heads to signal danger. And as you do reach the top, you are greeted by a school of mantine, which is just a beautiful sight to see as they soar above us. You may have also seen them at the very beginning of the route if you're playing at level 3. Something you might also start noticing is we have a lot of filter feeding Pokemon in these areas as well, or at least the bottom feeders. And while we don't get to see microscopic organisms in Pokemon besides, technically Pokerus, again, we can safely assume, even if we can't see them up here, that there are still likely plankton swimming about these waters, which, plankton, the bane of my existence as I just beg the Pokemon Company to release a plankton Pokemon. And now we can shift gears and head towards the alternate route, a route that will lead us into a cavernous land, dark and full of more freaking plankton, bioluminescing all over the place. Though this is only accessible once we fuel a Clawitzer with enough Lumina juice to blast away the rocks that are blocking the path. And I'm honestly amazed that it even needed us to help it with that, considering it could just pierce tanker holes with the jets of water that it releases normally. They do use their feelers on their claws to detect the location of prey, and in this area, we may watch them shoot quillfish for target practice or engage in combat with their own kind, like some sort of underwater western shooter. And poor quillfish, even I bullied them by making them puff up and then, making them move throughout the waters once you deflate them. But I don't know, they kind of deserve it since they get aggressive and crowd other Pokemon in these areas. Alternatively, you may also, before you reach the bottom, see some cute little Chinchou enjoying being in this area because they can bask in the sun that filters down below and take refuge in holes of the rock walls when they wish to rest. You'll have already seen some Inkay earlier, but you also get to watch it use its powers to confuse Chinchou, and then not just use its powers, but also flash its light, which is another way for it to hypnotize its prey, which is something that is very similar to what an octopus might do with their camouflage, or what a cuttlefish might do. So unfortunately, that Chinchou may not be surviving the rest of this day. Once we move through these caves, we'll notice a Sharpedo you may have seen before circling the waters from a different angle. In fact, you'll get to see a number of different Pokemon from a different angle as we are rising or diving in sections that you have already been through, now exploring the directions we didn't venture into. Luminion, when powered up in these lower areas, can actually fend off a Sharpedo as it protects its Finian babies. As we dive, this is also when we would have a Wailord pass us by amongst a massive slew of other Pokemon, only to see that once it does pass, is that same Lantern be caught, and then for us to free it. But again, still not ready to tell you about the special treasure. Deeper down below, we will see a mass of Lantern lighting up their way as one option, even if we don't save the one caught by Frillish. In addition, we do get to see Luminions sweeping the seafloor in search of food, and they may reveal a few Pokemon for us. One being that they could cause a Clamperl to rise up if we throw the Fluff Fruit close enough to it, and the Luminion wants to get its fill of food. Afterwards, we actually get to witness the Clamperl swimming away, which it's noted to do only when it's absolutely necessary, which makes sense considering it has a pretty solid shell for defense and not many things can get through it. While we don't see it try to eat Luminion, Clamperl are also noted in the regular Pokédex to snap shut on fish Pokemon and not let go until the fish gives up and Clamperl gets its meal. The other Pokemon that may appear is Starmie, who will shoot away faster than the Neo 1 moves earlier on in the route. It will then later be seen with its gem kind of barely poking out of the sand, and you can get the Luminion to uncover it, and they'll kind of interact with each other and glow bright with each other. At the end of this route, you'll notice or witness something that makes me genuinely uncomfortable, as we see a number of Golisopod doing what was described as my audience during streaming as aura farming. They stand unmoving, not reacting to a single thing around them. I threw so many fluff fruit at their faces and nothing happened whatsoever. But as you move up in levels, they will start moving around, and there's ruins all in this area. You can also trigger a fight between Golisopod after getting a Clawitzer to spray one of them, waking it up as it mistakes the other Golisopod for the offender, unless you're me. It's also here why I also tried and failed time and time and time again, because I have the attention span of a golden retriever, to try and get a male tentacruel that we find earlier in the route orbit and allow it to reappear with a female frillish in the end area here amongst the many other pairs of male and female frillish. If you don't do this and you're like me, the dance is ruined and the frillish is incredibly sad, or at least the one single frillish by itself. But hey, if you do remember to do this, then you can play music, brighten the crystal bloom, and they get to dance together. What's odd about this love between Pokemon is that they aren't even in the same A group. Tentacruel is Water 3, while Frillish is in the Amorphous A group, but hey, not everyone is looking to have kids, so as long as they're happy, that's all that matters. Finally, I share with you the treasure that Lantern leads us to, and that is the Great Wall itself, this soul of silver that rests deep within the trenches of the sea, Lugia. And of course, we actually get to not only see it sleeping, but we have the opportunity to wake it up, and man, nothing in this game made me feel smaller than Lugia in this very moment. It's easy to imagine Lugia flying in the sky. We've seen it a ton in the movies, but to watch as it circles the area where the Golisopod reside, appearing from the darkness and swimming above the ruins we find here above us and completely overshadowing us in its mass, strikes fear in my heart. I might have a fear of the deep sea, but I don't think we can just describe it as fear at this point. I think it's just common sense to be afraid of something that is multiple times my own size. And as if to make matters that much more terrifying, if you can hit it with a fluff root, it will spin in the water, pause for a moment, and then release a roar. And I have to say now, this is very special to me. Pokemon Crystal was my first Pokemon game, and the Heart Gold Soul Silver games are one of my favorites despite all their flaws. So witnessing this Pokemon in this fashion just hits me right in the nostalgia and draws out a welling of happiness. Though, back to our game, these ruins are quite strange, aren't they? We know these were man-made, or at least you'll know that for sure once we reach the end of Lental, which can only mean one thing: that these ruins were here before a rising of the sea caused their ruinous downfall. And maybe that was caused by Lugia. Maybe it was an entirely different threat altogether. But for now, we leave that unanswered and we move on to the next route. Side note, in terms of script, this is broken 30 pages and we still have 8 locations to get through, not including day or night cycles, but hey, we're in the Maricopia Reef during the daytime. At the start of this area, you will see Wingull and potentially even schools of Finian, and once again, you can commit assisted murder as you attract the attention of the Wingull to these fish with a fluff fruit, and it snatches up one of the Finian. Congratulations! But even if you don't do this, there are other areas in which this happens, so don't take it too hard. You may even get your attention caught by a Sharpedo zooming through the reef, jumping out the water, looking at some of the Wingull, even chasing a Squirtle until it is saved by a Lapras as it jumps onto it and said Pokemon intimidates the Sharpedo away. You'll see plenty of Pelipper, you'll witness the massive surfacing of Wailord, which forces you to move around them as they soak the Neo 1, and if you're a masochist that likes to face death head on, you can orb them and potentially cause their mouths to open wide, showing you their endless cavern of a maw, and potentially even throwing fruit into its face-mouth hole. But before this, you will become very aware of a massive whirlpool in the area. You could throw some fluff fruit down there and watch as a Magikarp jumps higher and higher with each additional fruit, but we'll come back to that whirlpool when it's more important in the evening. The Mantine race together while jumping into the air if you boost them with the power of the Crystal Bloom. Sometimes there's a Pikachu that rides one in the beginning of this. Even later, you get to witness Marini absolutely mobbing a poor little Corsola who only manages to escape by leaping over one of them and then going deeper into the waters. And the only way that you can really save it is if you're fast enough to just orb the Crystal Bloom early on in later levels, which then powers up a second Corsola that just watches this horrid thing happen and then jumps in to save the day before they run into the group, and then they celebrate together. One of the most fascinating encounters is finding out that Sharpedo is not always a hyper-aggressive beast as it's always made out to be throughout, almost every Pokédex entry. Instead, here in Lental, it likes to race, challenging anyone and anything. The only issue it has is that it can't maintain its speed for long. Though more specifically with this racing, you can witness it racing against a Machamp who turns out is an excellent swimmer capable of moving through the water as fast as any aquatic Pokemon according to the Photodex. This is of course put to the test, a battle of the tortoise and the hare if you would to some degree, Machamp representing a consistent speed and potentially longer endurance while Sharpedo can move fast but can't keep that top speed. Who wins? You decide with the power of your Illumina orb. If you throw the orb at the Sharpedo, then it will win the race and dance in celebration. Otherwise, the Machamp will win, and either way, it is very exhausted and will rest on the rock that you end at. There's also a Wailmer that might appear here on higher levels, and you can orbit, and it'll just spout out water from its blowhole, kind of like a bit of celebrating. The only actual bit of information left to this section is getting to witness Pyukumuku being carried around in Pelipper's mouth, and once again, I cannot escape the allegations of Pokemon murder as my first instinct was to throw a fruit at it and watch as the Pyukumuku is immediately thrown from the Pelipper's mouth and sinks into the water, very far down, where we can no longer see it. It's a sea cucumber, it should be fine, it'll be okay. But why is Pelipper carrying around Pyukumuku? Well, remember what happened when Wailmer shot the Pyukumuku out of the water? Well, the Pelipper are simply helping them return to the sea so that way they don't dry out on land. Directly noted as part of the game, which means that they are not prey to the Pelipper. So not only are the Pokemon in Lental typically less aggressive, we find out that they have fun together and even help each other regularly. Prepare to see a beautiful sunset as it's evening in the reef. We get to see Ocean Vivillon, Moringo flying through the air, some Inkay moving together along the route, and you might be amazed to see a Alolan Raichu here, which might be a bit weird, but this shows further that the evolution into their Alolan counterpart is more closely related to the environment itself. Hence the darker fur from more sunlight, the surfing due to having a life base on the coast, and even gaining a psychic typing likely due to a diet that consists of sweeter fruits found here. Not to overshill my other videos, but I have a whole video talking about the unbelievable depth on all of the regional variants and even reveal the secret of those Alolan pancakes. The Alolan Raichu will be seen here and in our next area playing, surfing, and even breakdancing if you do orb them properly, so they're just having fun out here. Though if you want to be a problem child to the ecosystem, throw an apple at one of the Squirtles jumping on a high up rock, and you'll watch it get knocked into the water by a Wingull attracted to the fluff fruit into the water and eventually dragged into the massive whirlpool we talked about. Chat had told me to do it, and I was not ready to just let this Squirtle's blood be on my hands, so after throwing enough Illumina orbs in there, we witness a Blastoise shoot out from the center of the whirlpool, save Squirtle, and disappear as a rocket into the distance. And I cannot express in words how dope that is, because it immediately made me think of Green in the Pokemon Adventures manga riding Blastoise. And another side note, highly recommend you check out my coverage of the entire red and yellow arcs of the manga. There's some of my favorite videos on the channel that I've done, especially the yellow arc. Drifblim can be seen flying through the area, likely just passing through. Otherwise, you can witness two of them floating separately from each other and the group, but by orbiting them, they may come together and one will make itself larger. It's a little hard to tell if that's them just communicating or if this is their way of having a mating ritual, but it's there. It's a chance encounter. There's also their interaction that you can see in level 2 as one can be seen carrying a clamperl into the distance. The game claims that this is just clamperl hitching a ride, and I find it hard to believe, but if so, then this would at least make me feel better, as it wouldn't make sense for a Drifblim to even eat this Pokemon to begin with. Then again, the photo dex also states that some of the clamperl have still never been seen again, so it might be a mix of eating some of them or carrying them like a taxi. Surprisingly, you can see Primarina swimming about, but we'll talk about them later in a special moment. To rapid fire, we get more Mantine, Wailord, even Marini, though you can attract the attention to Marini to some Clamperl, and it will actively trap one of the Clamperls with its tentacles. That might raise a question in your head. I thought Marini only eat Corsola. Well, Corsola are their preferred food in most regions to our understanding, especially as Marini may actually be based on the venomous crown of thorn starfish that does prey on coral polyps. But this does not mean that Corsola are their only prey, especially as within Galar, the Marini have not learned to actually prey upon Corsola due to all the Corsola bleaching and dying. So within Lental, we can see that they definitely eat both Corsola and Clamperl, both having a calcium-based shell if we want to consider their real-life counterparts, which with that we might be able to hone in on Marini's diet thanks to Pokemon Snap of all things, and state it would primarily try to eat anything that has a body containing or consisting of high calcium. For all you Eevee lovers out there, we have yet another evolution, as hidden in a hole under the water is a Pokemon that will only emerge when music is played, resulting in Vaporeon revealing itself, leaping out, and swimming away. We know that Vaporeon feed on fish, so of course it would make sense for them to live here where they can have a rich and varied diet of all different types of fish-based Pokemon. But the last of the Pokemon in this section includes another mythical, small and blue, only seen after orbing Vaporeon at the start of this route in post-game and 2 of the Crystal Blooms at the very beginning. We find Manaphy. Otherwise, it might appear later, but I had such an absolute struggle to try and even get it to appear the first time, and when you do get it to arrive on the scene, it's happy, it's cute, it'll dance to music, and that's pretty much all that happens with it. But we've brought up Mew, Celebi, Manaphy, yet another mythical Pokemon hiding away on these islands in which nature is left to flourish without our influence in the modern day. It is stated in the photo dex that Manaphy has a wondrous power that lets it bond with any kind of Pokemon, something we already know, and that it will sometimes rise up from the ocean floor, lured by the sound of beautiful singing. That singing is more than just the melody that we play. It is actually more naturally and likely the Lapras who find themselves here on the regular. In addition, I realized that this is the 3rd case in which we find an evolution and a mythical Pokemon within the same major area. In terms of lore, this could just be a coincidence and just a game designed by choice, but it is something that caught my eye anyway, their relation to mythical or legendaries. And moving away from that connection, considering Manaphy also enjoys the cold seafloor, then we can easily imagine that it delves deep under into those ancient ruins despite us never seeing it there. This would then tie our 3rd mythical Pokemon to the ruins that we have seen. This is no longer a coincidence, this is a pattern. We may have accidentally considered Lugia to be the guardian of the ruins, when in fact it may not have arrived here until long after they were destroyed and flooded. Again, just some speculation for now that I have not 100% delved into, and I basically promise you I will make a lore video on Pokemon Snap soonish after this one, because all of this lore has caught my attention. With pristine sands and pastel tones, we have arrived back onto the serene shorelines of Blushing Beach. Here during daylight hours, we have many of the usual suspects such as Vivillon, Wingull, and get to see Squirtle, Blastoise, Lapras, Finneon, and some Raichu pulling some more tricks. But from the beginning of this route, we do get to see Exeggutor lounging around on the beach. The important thing to note about them is that they are not your Alolan counterpart. Even more interesting is that when we look at Alolan Exeggutor, you cannot actually evolve Execute into it in any location except for within Alola to my knowledge. So there's clearly something within Alola that only allows Exeggutor to become its true Alolan form there. We have all the sunlight we could wish for here on the beach, so the only thing we're actually missing is the light of Necrozma itself. This genuinely feels like a very deliberate choice because we do see other regional variants in Lental, yet Executor is the normal one we'd expect to see, and then it's not. It's just its regular old form instead of its Alolan form, and they're noted to act the same as usual, soaking up their sun, but they will also sleep among other trees on the coast to camouflage themselves for protection. Protection from what, you may ask? Well, they are coconut trees. I mean, they are seeds technically, but they are still coconuts. And our next Pokemon has a tendency to punch said trees without checking for the heads of these Executor hanging above them. And so a Crab Brawler punches the body of an Executor only to potentially have one of those heads detach and have to find a new home amongst other lost Execute. And to be clear for audio-only people, yes, there are Crab Brawler found on these beaches and can be observed even fighting with one another. There's even a point where they kind of like throw water onto a Pikachu at one point, but I think that's only at night, so I'm jumping the gun a little bit. They do enjoy their fruit, so it would be no surprise to find out that a Crab Brawler may end up trying to eat any of the fallen Execute on occasion. With us being in the daytime, there's an Executor that blocks our way until we wake it up, but we can take our time. And through the use of a Crystal Bloom, draw out some Blossom and even play our melody to make them dance happily in the sun. They're noted to usually hide in vegetation, but come out to dance with friends when they are put into a happy mood. This makes the forest here that much more important, as both Executor and Blossom rely on it for coverage. In fact, I would go as far to say that Crab Brawler knocking coconuts down is also vital, because it doesn't mean to attack Executor. It is only trying to attack regular coconut trees, and if there are any coconuts left behind and they're massive piles of fruit that these crabs like to gather, then this would only ensure that the next generation of whatever plant those fruits came from thrive. Though Blossom being here leads to another theory that I've had for a while, and that is evolution stones are not actually necessary for every Pokemon that uses them to evolve. These stones simply speed up the process of evolution. This would explain why Blossom is here, because it doesn't need the Sunstone, considering there is an absolute abundance of open and clean air, allowing sunlight to fully filter down here, and it doesn't need to compete for the sunlight, and as such will then, with all of these factors combined together, evolve naturally. And moving past this section, we do have a split in the road that will take us through some rocky outcroppings, show us some Pyukumuku interacting with each other in this area. I also found this to be one of the better places to interact with them, but not take very good pictures, since Professor Mirror just wants us to shove the camera down their throats for more points. The way they also just grab the fruit and so quickly eat it is a little bit scary, I gotta say, but they're still excessively cute to me anyway. It's also stated in their photo decks that they like competing with each other to see who's the strongest, so I imagine them arm wrestling only for them to fly a million miles away, whenever they lose, that is. And plenty of Corsola do find a safe home here, teeter-tottering about, interacting with other Pokemon, and towards the end, we find not only Raichu, but also signs of Sandygast buried with its shovel sticking out, though they're not ready to come out yet. We'll see them later. We even witnessed several Clamperl vibing in level 1, but then see that they are being carried away in level 2 by a bunch of Driftblim. Really makes you wonder which one of them will make it to their destination and which ones will be lost at sea forever. Do they just kind of choose one of their family to leave behind? That's horrifying, actually. In addition to this, there are a number of interactions that can happen with the floppy fish known as Stunfisk. Now, this guy is an ambush predator. Step on it, you're gonna get shocked, then become its next meal if you fall victim to the damage. This reaction occurs with fluff fruit thrown at them, but if you draw a Pikachu close to it, there is the chance that they will ride on Stunfisk's back because Pikachu can just absorb the electric shock. Though, if you take the alternate route, underwater is where we'll finally see this fish, for the first time, at least for me, buried in the sand. The only way to lure it out is by using the scan function, causing it to then react and pull itself out of the sand. If you throw a fruit, it'll shock once. Then it will have a second discharge that sparks an octillery nearby, who will then release ink from its mouth as it escapes for safety. Now, these rocky crags in this area are perfect for octillery to hide under and around, keeping it as their territory, and I'd be willing to bet that they'd grab any unlucky fish that swim by, even if we don't really get to see that happening within Snap. And the last notable interaction is seeing Machamp here, likely just being here because working out on the sand and swimming is a great way to challenge your body and get in some good exercises. It'll even flex at us if you orbit. At night, we see most of the same sights, which I feel like a broken record saying, but save for a Magikarp that appears or a number of Pokemon sleeping. You can also see Executor chasing Crabrawler away before it can punch them, and towards the end of the route, we can watch another Crabrawler potentially get hypnotized by the now present Sandygast. But this also goes further, as once it does wake up, it will throw sand at the Pokemon and Sandygast will actually increase in size. The problem with this is we might be able to assume Crabrawler is awake, but not aware of what it's doing as it is now under Sandygast's control, helping it become larger over time so that way it can eventually become Palisand. Other Pokemon still present are Blossom, Pyukumuku Arm Wrestling, Inkay that will react to music once you lure them in with fruit, and a potential encounter with both Zangoose and Seviper. There's some steps to this that begin with Primarina, as you need to absolutely launch an orb at her in order to trigger an event later, and it can be really difficult to nail that shot. And why this triggers the Zangoose interaction is because the Zangoose is watching Primarina. If you don't orb her, she goes in the opposite direction and Zangoose follows along the coast. You could say that the Zangoose may be enamored with her voice, especially as we see it later, that we'll talk about in a moment, or that it might be a bodyguard of sorts. I'm not really sure. But if you do orb the Primarina, you can then lure out a Seviper hiding away in the nearby brush where the Blossom were initially found. And once that's done, you can witness the classic fight between Zangoose and Seviper. No matter what, you'll still find a Zangoose at Primarina's night concert with a full audience. And we find all kinds of Pokemon here, even predator and prey species sitting peacefully together as they watch the display. And you can trigger the concert to fully begin once you orb the crystal bloom that's there, and Primarina will sing her heart out. And of course, when I tried feeding her, the apple bopped off of the ground and then bopped into her, and then she stopped singing and then swam away, and then the entire audience just peacefully dispersed, and I was berated by my audience for that one also. And by berated, I mean lovingly made fun of for it. But even after she was done singing, I was amazed to see that the Pokemon present didn't immediately turn on each other, especially the Marini, as it was sitting right next to a Corsola, very happily just actively looking at it. We can figure out what's potentially going on by reading Primarina's dex entry from Ultra Moon and Pokemon Home. Also known as a songstress, Primarina has a fantastical look on moonlit nights when it leads its colony in song. For Primarina, every battle's a stage. Its singing and dancing of its balloons will mesmerize the audience. So it seems as though one of two things could be happening, if not both. The Pokemon here are truly mesmerized through an effect of Primarina's singing. Alternatively, they are not just an audience who are under a form of hypnosis, but also burgeoning vocalists who are there as part of her choir, who will one day sing along with Primarina on these moonlit nights. I say her, but I did not actually check if the Primarina was male or female. Oops. I'm sure you will see if you are watching. But the last significant encounter is when we watch Seviper corner Octillery. Though with an orbing of the Crystal Bloom, it'll blast that Seviper with ink and cause it to launch into the water to escape, showing that Seviper, just like our Arbok, is just as much a sea snake as it is a land snake, especially because we can really see it swimming later on. It's a bit funny too, because after the Octillery celebrates, there's a point where it kind of scratches its head and it's like, wait, was that me? How did I do that? But with that though, that's another island closed for us. Pack up your equipment and say goodbye to paradise as we move on to our next destination. Here we stand at Voluca Island. It bears its naming from Volucris, which is Latin for bird, and then of course the word volcano, which, now that I've said Voluca, it doesn't make much sense for there to be a ch sound in there. If anything, it's more likely Voluca, but I'm going to say Voluca anyway. It is a harsh land, dry and volcanic, who would have guessed, covered in deserts and mountainous terrain, which is perfect for all kinds of ground, rock, and fire Pokemon. Dry heat, powerful winds, and even toxic fumes define these lands, and many of our extreme Pokemon make home here. In our Illumina spot, we are blessed with the great sun god itself. And no, I'm not talking about Alola's lion sun god. I'm talking about one of my favorite bug-type Pokemon of all time, Volcarona. And in fact, we find 2 of them here, bathed in beautiful, caressing flames that must be dispersed with fruit before you can orb them and witness what we have witnessed before, their Illumina power. And it is so incredibly difficult to even hit them with this fruit that they zoom around, and there are points where they just stare at you. They just let you stare at them for a couple of seconds, teasing you before you finally realize, oh, they're not moving anymore. And when you lob the fruit or lob an orb at them, phew, they're off. They don't care about you or what you're doing. But whatever, I digress. It's here that I also, within like my first time playing of the game, that I started to notice a pattern. And the pattern is quite literal, as they have lines appear on their bodies, all of these Illumina Pokemon. And there's no real explanation for these veins of energy, but I would like to consider them exactly that. These are natural veins that are present in every Pokemon. Lifelines, if you would, for which their energy took course through. But it is only when they are supercharged that we get to see them in their full extent. Think of it similar to the markings we find on a Lucario, who is also known to have great control over its life energy in the form of aura. Now, these Volcarona flit and dance, releasing torrents of flame together, and will eventually return to their tunnels deep within the infernal volcano, where they prefer to stay. The Photodex notes that they spoke to each other before we left, but of course we don't really know what they said. And we are also informed the idea of 2 Illumina Pokemon in one location was something that had never crossed the mind of Professor Mirror before, so what exactly could this mean? Well, this doesn't feel like a succession thing. One of these Volcarona are not older than the other one, nor do they seem to hold any level of hierarchy over each other. We also know that Volcarona can live for an incredibly long time, and in the case of the one buried in Unova, it was there for thousands of years. Keep this in mind because I won't be solving this here, but this idea of living an incredibly long time and there being a very special timeline that occurs within Lental lines up with some very special events within the timeline of Pokemon that you are traditionally aware of. Now, in the speculation, we know Volcarona emits a great amount of heat. That's why it was worshipped as a god of the sun. They're even found under Alola's volcano, so there's a pattern in which where they actually naturally belong. I would like to propose, then, the idea that Volcarona is more than just emitting heat, it is the reason behind the volcano staying active. This sounds super bold on the surface, but bear with me as I explain why I believe this. Magma, as we see it below the ground, is just superheated and pressurized rock. With enough heat and pressure, everything just melts down into this spicy orange juice that we have before us. So what if we just had a Pokemon that could simply keep that heat on? A Pokemon that could withstand the heat that already exists and then maintain that heat. One that can move quickly throughout the lands, or more aptly, 2 that can ensure the entire island is kept in a dry heat necessary for the life here. Well, after all, the Volcarona do separate and go in opposite directions multiple times throughout this event, meaning that their conversation at the very end of it was likely in relation to the quality of the island and deciding where they should go next. This lets us explain why, or how, the Illumina Pokemon are chosen. They are chosen by their ability to maintain life on these islands in their entirety. How can they provide their ecosystems with the necessary materials or climate to allow them to thrive? And if this Illumina energy is boosting the basic natural capabilities of a Pokemon, as we have seen time and time again, then in this sense, they are boosting this infernal heat that these Volcarona are able to emit. And with any Illumina Pokemon, if they are the right candidate, then they are given the ability to fully take on the powers of the Illumina phenomenon that exists here. And I really do mean given. They are gifted this ability. If you know a Pokemon lies at the end of Pokemon Snap, the source of the Illumina phenomenon, you are already agreeing with what I'm saying, I almost guarantee. If you don't know, don't you worry, this is only going to make more sense as we continue. I'm just piecemealing everything together for you because there's just so much lore and ecology here that if I dropped it all at once, it would overwhelm you. Or at least it would potentially overwhelm you. I can't say how you feel for you. And forgive me if I'm getting a little too excited here. I'm not going to stop myself from getting excited because this is like my job and I enjoy this. But this next part is one of my favorite places in all of Snap, as we have dinosaurs, because there are other rooms and routes in this level where you can find 3 other Pokemon: Archeops, Monferno, and Talonflame. They'll all simply approach the Volcarona or appear alongside it or in the area with no massive interaction, but you'll also find that these Pokemon are found throughout the island, much like so many of the other Pokemon who have appeared with our Illumina Pokemon. Almost as though any of the ones that appear with the Illumina Pokemon may all actually be scouts to help maintain peace on the islands. We back out of the Illumina spot to enter the true volcano itself, and we are treated to an absolute scene of a hot spring immediately. We are barraged with visuals of Altaria flying or enjoying the steam of the bath. We get to enjoy Shinx and Luxray, who you can reunite with each other. And Altaria are known to really enjoy bathing, even though it will cause their wings to lose fluffiness if they bathe for too long. Conversely to this though, the photo dex directly states the hot springs help keep their cottony wings nice and fluffy, and this Pokemon loves music so much it can't help but hum along if it hears a melody. As such, this is actually the perfect little place for the Altaria to at least visit in their travels. We'll come back to Shinx later, but Luxray itself is ever the watchful parent, noted to behave with great discipline, and if it ever loses sight of its Shinx, it will see through objects to quickly find their children and be reunited. And as a side, I am finding out more and more that parents are watching my videos with their children, and that's just wild to me. I can't wait until like years from now and I'm made to feel as old as dust when somebody says that they've been watching me since they were little, or that they're in college now and all these other things. But that aside, once again, why here? Why are Shinx and Luxray only specifically found in the volcano and the wastelands, as we'll see later? This is because Shinx and its line are likely inspired by a real-life lynx. But the closest I could get to that is the Caracal, who is also called the Desert Lynx. In addition, it seems like this isn't the only time this Pokemon exists in warmer environments, as it can be found in Fuego Ironworks and Sinnoh and in the surrounding routes to it. This goes further to find it in places such as Pot Bottom Desert and Galar, but their habitats expand into the colder areas such as the Coronet Highlands as well. So it seems as though the Shinx line just has the ability to survive and even thrive in a wide range of environments because of their tendency to reside in extremes. As we continue, you'll find both Talonflame, Monferno, and Archeops, which means you'll find 3 and not both, throughout the route. They don't really interact with any other Pokemon and fulfill that concept of being scouts separated from the ecosystem itself, until you see in one scenario where an Archeops has cornered a Charmander, you can orbit, and then it scares the Archeops away. Or when the Archeops are running for their dear lives because of a certain dinosaur we'll talk about soon. Now, Talonflame still note that it will hunt for prey, but we never see it hunt within the game. I wouldn't be surprised if it is doing as it states and just swooping down on Pokemon in other areas for a quick meal, ones that it can more easily carry, such as rodents. Talonflame also states that its feathers are fireproof, so being near lava is perfectly fine according to the Photodex, which, yeah, it's kind of a big deal considering the sheer amount of heat that lava releases, let alone the toxic fumes. Theoretically speaking, if you jump into a volcano, you're likely to just sprain or break parts of your body on impact and instead die from the noxious fumes and the heat shriveling up your lungs, let alone being lit on fire from the sheer heat. Probably just instantaneous combustion to some capacity. Horrible way to die when you put it that way. For Monferno, we do get some additional info that explains why we find them here. Monferno states that it always wants to be the strongest in their pack, so they like harsh environments that toughen them up. That's why you can find them training in steep, dangerous places around the volcano. But what's strange is that Archeops is not really given anything extra here, which is a shame because it is my favorite fossil Pokemon, or more specifically, Arcan actually is. And as though this area wasn't dense enough with life, there's still more. Because when we proceed down a ramp, we'll be nearly bumped into as Graveler rolled down the same decline. This decline seems so smooth, in addition to a number of other areas, that I would be willing to argue that their constant rolling around is what has shaped the flooring in these areas and made it so smooth. And right as we're leaving this decline, there's even more going on. It's a bit overwhelming, but I genuinely love it because it shows just how many Pokemon can just happily exist near each other while others are just going absolutely wild. For example, you can see a Typhlosion on top of a ledge run into the next area after you throw an orb or fruit it, I don't quite remember. And it is here, though, that it will then reappear at this decline above you and have a conflict with the Aerodactyl that was flying above and around. Their standoff begins, and if you orb Typhlosion, you witness it explode with vibrant, fiery heat and scare off the Aerodactyl. It is noted in the Snap Dex that it will burn anyone that it doesn't recognize into charcoal. We might then be able to assume that even though we're going to see a few more dinosaurs here and on other islands, that Aerodactyl is not native to the volcano area itself. It's because of this that the Typhlosion stands atop the rocks, because it is watching for the unwanted and regular return of Aerodactyl, who may disturb the peace and maybe snatch up a Pokemon or two as their next meal. So, very big no-no. And of course, to play devil's advocate to what I just said, the Photo Dex does state Aerodactyl rules the air in and around the volcano where many prehistoric Pokemon live. It seems to like amber, which might bring back memories of old friends, so take that as you will. On our line of dinosaurs, the king itself appears in this hyper-condensed section. Tyrancho bursts through and can be seen scaring away a couple of different Pokemon depending on the level in which you play through this section. They can also be seen arguing with each other as they roar, and they might block paths while sleeping and can be seen challenging another Pokemon later. But we have to build up to why that challenge happens before I could just tell you who the showdown is with. A funny little event is that you can orb some Monferno to help them show up some courage and wake up a sleeping Tyrancho, who then roars at them in anger as if it's some kind of grandpa of the house getting irritated with some rowdy teenagers, and that Monferno left behind is very, very terrified. They're kind of like the jokesters of this island, messing with Pokemon left, right, and center, and kind of like really egging each other on to do something stupid. Something that you might have asked by now is, why are there so many dinosaurs here? Why haven't they just gone extinct like they have in so many other areas of the Pokemon world? I mean, we even got to see Cradily in the previous island, so what's going on here? Well, there are two reasons for this. One is that the climate itself is just what they need to thrive. The waters are at the right temperature, the land is still as it was, and so they just get to exist happily. But it's more than this, because if this is supposed to line up with the real world in some capacity, then a meteor should have still caused the death and extinction of many Pokemon as we know it. You know, volcanoes going off, pyroclastic material going up into the air throughout the world, so on and so forth. And that's when I get to say, it did, but not here. Instead, the effects were not felt here at all, and more than that, the meteor, or potentially meteors, that would have landed here was prevented. Once again, something that I have 100% confirmation of, and we will talk about later. Now that we finally seem to be moving on from this condensed area full of Pokemon, you'll begin to see Charmander throughout the route more and more. They happily move about and will eat fruits you throw or release flames after an orbing or two. Then after going underground, we will encounter a slew of Pokemon in a room full of blue lava. And yes, blue lava is absolutely real. It is a phenomenon caused by large amounts of sulfur gas igniting and burning all up while reacting with the air itself. A real-life example of this is Indonesia's Kawah Ijen volcano, which is, a volcano that does exactly that, have blue lava. And I know exactly what the source of the sulfur within the Pokemon Snap game is. It's just coal. Just a ridiculous amount of coal, or at least coal that has been broken down and then the sulfur is readily more available, or whatever the heck is going on here. And we can know this is true for a fact because of one very special tortoise being added in this specific area. The coal eater itself, Torkoal. Not only that, but it just stays near the lava lake or around these lava areas because the heat is said to help keep its flames strong and healthy, even while it's napping. Other Pokemon in a big lava room include Slugma, who is born of the magma, and you can even knock one into the lava pool or encourage them to go into the lava pool in general and then watch them crawl out. The Photodex is also the only entry to state that Slugma often burns its food with its own heat, which makes eating a tricky task. I never really imagined this Pokemon eating, ever. And yes, I know you can just shove food into almost any Pokemon through picnics or Pokemon Sleep, but that's just part of a game mechanic. There's a secret to it that I would not have actually realized without the 31st sharing with me, which is that Pokemon who don't eat canonically, such as Metapod or other cocoon Pokemon, actually get the smallest portion of food whenever they are served, likely to represent them being creatures that do not eat, and that this is truly just for the necessary mechanic. And if you want more on that whole thing, on what every single Pokemon eats, go watch my Pokemon food chain video, not the old one. But back to this little room, or rather very large lava room that's incredibly dangerous and would burn your entire body to a crisp if we weren't in the Neo 1. Charmander is here, and so is another evolution with the entrance of Flareon. Other than it being warm here and then finding a bunch of them later on, there really is only one other reason it's here, or the very least, its appearance here should help you realize there's a very special Pokemon at the end of this route, because we have patterns. But before we even get there are two instances or interactions that we need to talk about. In one route, you can cause an interaction in which a Graveler will fall down onto two Charmander, but as they escape and the ground now erupts with lava, Charizard bursts up from the ground to present itself. Alternatively, we go to that lava pool, and after Tyranitar has been causing a massive uproar, potentially even scaring or threatening the Charmander we see in the same room later on, Charizard can appear and the two will begin their showdown, which can be encouraged further. And we get to see, only in the Photodex once more, Charizard form herds with Charmander, and they all live together near the volcano. The flames they breathe are as hot as the lava around them. In other words, despite how aggressive or combative they may be, their line is a communal species that care for and raise their young, something that is not seen in all creatures or even Pokemon for that matter. But let's rewind all the way back to the very beginning of this route, because I kept a secret from you. For if you look to your right, in the post-game, between the rocks, immediately at the start of the route, you may catch a glimpse of the Golden Emperor and the Bringer of Rainbows, Defender of the Sky, Ho-Oh. Once you've taken a picture, your task is now to throw Illumina orbs at 3 feathers that you will find along the way of the alternate route. Once you do this, instead of watching an interaction in which Aerodactyl drops down on the Typhlosion, or the Typhlosion interacting with you as you feed them, you will instead, at the end of this round, be greeted by Ho-Oh, who hits me so hard in the nostalgia once more with its signature pose and its screech. Or... that puts a smile on my face. Oh, that should not have gotten me the way that it did. Oh, I love it. Oh, it brought tears to my eyes. Oh my god, I love Ho-Oh so much. I tried to get better footage of it, and then I completely messed it up and missed getting a feather, so you get to just enjoy my initial reaction of seeing it appear. And, of course, We get another evolution within the same area as a special Pokemon, as I had hinted earlier. And again, the Flareon are just moving in a massive herd in this final spiral, in this final section. We're not granted any other reasoning, but the area we have these final encounters in is within more ancient ruins. Yet another situation that seems absolutely impossible when we imagine humans being this deep in an active volcano. And I'm not just going to go with the idea of, oh, humans in the Pokemon world are super durable. There's a reason why we are in the Neo 1. We would be dying over and over and over again if we weren't in it. So it makes you wonder if it was truly only humans that created these ruins, doesn't it? We move out and into the Barren Badlands during the day. Right off the bat, if you look at the rocky ledge, you can see a Pokemon born when lightning strikes an erupting volcano, resulting in the creation of Zorora. Its presence is explained in the photo decks, as Zorora runs as fast as a lightning bolt, patrolling Voluca Island to keep the peace. We were lucky to spot it in the Barren Badlands. Yet another example of Pokemon keeping the peace amongst themselves, but what are they defending the residents from? We'll just have to find out once things cool down at night and new friends come out to play. This is also, I think, the only instance in which an evolution is not present on the same route as a mythical or legendary Pokemon. But for now, you can witness Manbuzz floating throughout the route, just waiting for Pokemon to become weakened so they may acquire an easier meal. Though the Dex here likes to try and state that it's just waiting for an opportunity to steal food from other Pokemon, which, again, another strange instance where we know the Pokemon hunts other Pokemon, but it's not doing that here, apparently. Also, throughout this route, we can witness Shinx, Torchic, Tepig, and even Rockruff running around together. And while the Torchic have some fairly simple interactions with others, playing or getting startled, there is one fun bit in its dex that states that they often peck the ground in search of pebbles. Eating them helps it digest its food and makes the flames it exhales even hotter. You could say it's like feeding two birds with one stone. That's the photo decks, not me. But this is a legitimate thing that does happen in the real world, as there are a number of animals that will do exactly this. This is especially the case for animals that don't have the ability to grind down their food due to a lack of molars, so they, consume a few pebbles. Tepig, on the other hand, can thrive within these barren lands because not only can it withstand the heat, as many of our Pokemon here can, but it also has a keen sense of smell and the skill to be able to track scents in search of food. Also, just realized something. That Rockruff might only be a nighttime encounter with the full 4 team there. Oops. Anyway, with Tepig, this means that with how communal the Pokemon here can be, Tepig itself may be incredibly vital to the smaller species we find here, as they team up with each other and support each other in a number of different ways. Falling from the skies here and in another route on this island are Meteor. For some strange reason, while you can have instances in which they simply fall down from above in our next location, there are also plenty of instances in which they only crash down once you've illuminated a crystal bloom. They're noted to fly back up into the sky rather than just dissipate as they do in other regions. Again, our question is why? And our only answer, once more, is this idea that there is an incredible amount of life energy throughout these islands, which in turn prevents the depressing death of Meteor once their shells crack open. Also, their shells don't always crack open here, as they may land in sand, which cushions their fall. We are shown that these crash landings do contribute to the way the landscape looks, whether it be through craters or stirring up the ground itself in general, as it uncovers Pokemon even. And by leaving the shells behind, the materials that compose them become good nutrients for the ground or even mineral-eating Pokemon to enjoy. Of the Pokemon hiding away in said sand are Diglett, who will pop up throughout the route, of course, with the right encouragement. There's a chance that you can get the Diglett to, instead of eating, throw fruits between each other as they play and Rockruff watches, but we'll see another home for them soon. While Rockruff is known to play with Pokemon here, while also being very defensive of its friends. And if ever it gets out of its depth, then its parent, a midnight lichen rock, is not too far away. They can be seen traveling with each other or hidden amongst rocks, or said lichen rock is just roaming about on the right levels. Here in Lental, they are noted to almost never eat anything that they don't catch themselves, the midnight lichen rock that is. So we get more implications of it eating other Pokemon, but it doesn't attack anything that we see. The only hint we get from here is the idea that it is always hungry for battle, even against strong opponents. So the lichen rock here may be another way to ensure that more powerful Pokemon in the area are kept in check. Think of it like a first wave of defense before Zorora has to step in. And speaking of lines of defense, Big Mama Kangaskhan is here, who is seen keeping our younger Pokemon safe. There are a lot of Pokemon that can take full advantage of the sand here. Some do this so they can hide from the heat of the sun by digging rather than going into caves. Others use this sand for travel, and yet others may use it to lie in wait for prey. Thus is the case for Silicobra that are found here. You can also witness them annoying a Scolipede later in the route, only to be chased away by the terrifying giant centipede, though if you really want, you can help them escape by orbiting a crystal bloom nearby. You'd also expect that Scolipede to be hunting other Pokemon, but it only fights another Scolipede in one scenario, while sleeping alongside Shinx and Torchic in another. As a reminder, this is another Pokemon, similar to Sharpedo, that is traditionally noted to be very aggressive and being very willing to hunt for prey left, right, and center, or take down those that enters its territory in an instant. Yet here it is, in what is described as a barren land, being very friendly with much smaller Pokemon. Even the Dex entry states Scolipede is at its most aggressive when it's chasing down foes at full speed. It has a tendency to curl up into a ball when it sleeps, and that may be an old habit from long ago, which is just a reference to Whirlipede. Either way, this then implies that the Scolipede may be only having territorial disputes with other Scolipede. Maybe whoever wins is the one who gets to eat. In addition, this would even line up with why it isn't eating other Pokemon, because they're just far too small. Usually you would expect a creature in harsh environments to be adapted towards eating whatever comes its way, but unlike real life, or even animals adapted to the Arctic lands or desert lands may still die due to extreme conditions, Pokemon are often perfectly fine no matter the climate, as long as they are adapted to it, for the most part. As such, many of these Pokemon likely aren't wasting excessive calories due to the extreme heat and could just continue to exist without worry or putting in excessive effort towards hunting and foraging, especially if they work together. There are some Hippowdon that might appear on a ledge, but there's a better time to talk about it. Crustle can also be found here, where they will even have a friendly little fight with each other, and you can choose who wins between them. You can also get Torchic to kind of jump on top of Crustle, and it'll peck away at the top of Crustle's shell. To follow this, we get to focus on those poisonous swamps in the area. In said swamp, there is a green ichor that bubbles up and is noted to harden and crystallize above the pool. It was originally a mystery to me as to what makes them so poisonous or toxic, but we also know that this is a natural area. Despite that, there is not a single instance in real life that we have just big old poisonous pools of ichor that just exist like this. And there's only one explanation that I can reliably consider, and it's something that we are very directly shown, and I just didn't realize it until I was getting the extra footage. And that is, you can trigger an event to occur in which from the poisonous pools, you will not only get a ton of Swalot emerging in just this violent explosion, but also there are these little areas, these little mounds, if you would, that have crystals on them that will then release a toxic or poisonous gas into the area. This likely somehow is then turning into the liquid, and that liquid, after building up and sitting in the heat for a long enough time, will then eventually evaporate or at least harden to become these crystals that we do see. It's also here that we do find Coughing, and the deck states that Coughing's body is full of poisonous gas. If you see one all puffed up, that's because the gases of the poison swamp have triggered a chemical reaction, which I'm not surprised by at all. It is made up of these gases. Meanwhile, Swalot's entry states, this greedy glutton can swallow almost anything whole and digest it too. It loves to eat poisonous things, so a toxic swamp is like an endless buffet to it. And now I've talked about this in my toxic ecology video, but we've learned that a lot of poisonous Pokemon are not only born from the poison of this world, but are also the answer to getting rid of it. There are a lot of special cases within their world, so it's inevitable for a place like this to come into existence. And the easy answer is to have a Pokemon like Swalot already exist to be able to get rid of such a toxic area, or at least control it. Further than this, you can trigger an event in which Swalot will actually try to swallow Coughing when it enters its territory, though it is launched into the distance by the Swalot, keeping it alive and well. The mission for this also specifically notes that Swalot was trying to eat it, but probably spat it out, so believe what you will in this scenario. The last encounter to note in the daytime is when we find a Salazzle hiding behind a rock. Play some music and it'll come out for you to lure to different locations with fruit. It will throw sand on itself to disguise its scent, then when it's brought over to Kangaskhan, it'll hiss at the mother. Though if Zorora is awoken early on and it does run off, Salazzle will follow it instead. Later it reappears in the swamps almost as if to say that it wasn't welcome near the Zorora, as we find that electric critter sitting at the end of the route. There's also a mission in which you can get it to strike what the game notes as an alluring pose. So to add to their ability to release pheromones that attract males, I suppose they also lure them in by posing. I do find it interesting that this is our second desert dweller that is feminine and releases pheromones, and was introduced in Alola, as the other one is Pheromosa. And another side note before we move on to nighttime, Ultra Recon Squad Pokemon Legends game where they introduce snap mechanics would go pretty hard. It is now 4:30 in the morning because your boy is still working on this on the Thursday before this releases, because this is that big of a video and has that much detail. So I don't know why I felt the need to share that. I'm tired, but we're going into the Badlands night, because here at night we are told that many Pokemon do make their way out into the Badlands as it is finally cooled down. Probably because there's so much sun and heat that what happens is all the sand and rock is absorbing it and then holding onto it incredibly well. Think of it like the concrete jungle, why buildings in the modern day are starting to put on a bunch of like vines or other green walls to help cool down the areas, because otherwise that heat is constantly reflected between all of the surfaces and makes the area overall that much hotter and less bearable. The two most significant encounters are incredibly hard to even trigger in the first place. One of them, actually both of them really, being once you've messed around with the Sandshrew rolling around and the Diglett in the area enough to change their pathways while also waking up Gligar in the area. What this will then result in is the Gligar trying to hunt down a Vivillon, or at least bothering them, and the Vivillon using sleep powder on them, which shows why the professor had questioned the reason why the Gligar were even sleeping at night, because to his understanding and to the understanding of the public in general, Gligar are supposed to be nocturnal, so why are there 4, 5, 6 of them, whatever, sleeping here? They should be awake, moving around, hunting other Pokemon. Well, it's because the Vivillon are defending themselves, they're using sleep powder, and they're putting these bad boys to sleep, and they sleep upside down, which is really cute because they can just kind of do so against any rock surface, and they're just sleeping like vampires. The other significant encounter does kind of bounce off of that in my opinion, but I guess you could also say that the gathering of all the different types of Vivillon and all their colorful glory is another important thing to keep mind of, because once the mission is complete, that says something along the lines of Vivillon being here and why there's so many, you find out that they are attracted potentially by the energy of the valley. So they travel across the sea to come here. Whether that means they're coming here from other islands across Lental, or they're coming literally across the sea from other regions altogether, I'll leave that up to you. I imagine that they're just coming in from the other islands of Lental. There's a swarm of Magikarp that can be released with a geyser eruption. Otherwise, if you're just starting out a level, you might just see a swarm of the Magikarp surrounding where the geyser would be, as they helplessly flop around and await their demise from another Pokemon, or they're just flopping around for no reason because we've seen Magikarp actually be able to move around and jump over mountains in this game. So I'm not really sure what they're doing, and originally I felt horrible knowing that I couldn't do anything to help them, but I feel like they're doing this on purpose, and I shouldn't feel pity for them. There are a couple of those sand shrew moving around. Like I said, Kangaskhan is sleeping, which is really funny because there is an encounter with a lichen rock where if you mess with it when it lands in the toxic area, it'll get upset with you. So I usually just throw a fluffer at it. And then later on, when you encounter it again, it is just waiting to growl at you. And the second it starts to growl and bark at you, Kangaskhan wakes up with its baby, now awake too, comes over and roars at the lichen rock because you do not wake up a sleeping mother when her child is finally asleep. That was a big no-no, and so that lichen rock was sent running with its tail between its legs, which was not in my script at all, but it was really funny to find while I was getting footage. There's Mandibuzz in a couple of areas, more Meteor, and then that Torchic encounter that I had mentioned, which I don't personally remember if it's supposed to happen only during the daytime or nighttime, but it's here in my script that it's supposed to happen at nighttime, so whatever, I guess. This won't be the last time, though, that we see Torchic potentially acting as well as an oxpecker, because of the idea that this bird may be doing more than just getting pebbles from on top of crustal. It might actually be picking parasites off of it that it can't otherwise reach. It is strange to me to find midday lichen rock running around at night here. The one encounter that you can get is that if you get a Rockruff on level 1 to wake up, it will howl, and then one of the lichen rock will appear to howl with it. I bet this is to ensure that any would-be predators are intimidated by the presence of a full lichen rock, keeping its Rockruff safe, which we can confirm as it is said to be a loyal Pokemon that does what it can for those it holds dear, and it will use its rocky mane and claws to protect Rockruff in its care. Our grouping of young Pokemon can be seen sleeping together, potentially, until a Mandibuzz comes in to intimidate and maybe even eat them. Though with some extra power given to the Rockruff and waking it up, powering it up with an orb, it will roar at the Mandibuzz and scare it away. Plenty of Diglett are moving around, with a trio of them being able to form together like a Doug trio, and there are more interactions with that Gliscor that I mentioned earlier. Now, with them hanging off those rock arches, if you disturb the correct one and you still did the whole sand shrew thing, then what could happen is they will end up causing the Scolipede at the end of the valley to wake up. And it's also here that you get to see a Gliscor avoid getting absolutely smashed to pieces by 3 different Meteor before that Gliscor would then turn around, go near that Scolipede, and then the two will fight each other. When I say these interactions are incredibly convoluted or super detailed, I mean it. You cannot get this interaction unless 1, you have good luck, and 2, you do all the steps that it takes to get to that point. With Pokemon that aren't even related to that final interaction other than the Scolipede waking up, because we can't wake that Scolipede up ourselves. There's also an instance where if you can get a Scolipede to be near a Swalot, then there is the chance that the Swalot might try to swallow Scolipede's tail, which really bad idea, buddy. I could just about promise you that you will not be making that mistake and living to see the next dawn. Our final interactions are thanks to the presence of someone you likely have already noticed, Tyranitar, who is immediately at the start of the route. In level 2, it will sleep near the geyser, and if you wake it up when you're nearby, it will roar really closely at the near one, and your screen will shake like it's going through a horrible earthquake, which it might be doing, and it is a little bit horrifying. If you manage to wake it up while you're out of sight, it may instead absolutely topple the poor Crustle that's nearby. Though this can go even further by first awakening Zorora at the beginning of the route on your left, which will then prevent Tyranitar's rampage against Crustle as Zorora saves the day and the two fight amongst themselves, and they get super close to the Neo 1, whether that be just them fighting or Zorora running past you when it's fully charged after you've orbed it. Whatever it is, I fear for my safety because I genuinely do not believe that the Neo 1 can handle the damage that both a full-powered Zorora and Tyranitar can deliver. I mean, they are monsters. Now, I have to say I do love a good wasteland like this, because just like in Snap, it is the same in real life, or at least similar in real life, where once the sun goes down and everything begins to cool dramatically, it's a whole new world of life specialized to deal with the dramatic and potentially freezing temperatures depending on what badland or desert it might be. Editing acrylic here, I realized I never talked about the holes that Onyx made throughout this badland at all, and those are great places for small Pokemon to hide from the heat or just generally play in. Now you can move on to the next section. So I made a big oops while putting this video together, and the oops was me not writing for the Sweltering Sands at all. I was literally getting the extra footage or refined footage for this area when I realized I didn't talk about Flygon and how its sandstorms affect the area, and I was like, oh, this is fine. And then I saw Hippowdon and how Torchic was interacting with it, and I went, oh, I don't remember talking about that in my script. Oh no, I haven't written the script for this part, so here we are in the Sweltering Sands during the daytime. There are more Vivillon around as per usual. There is a Scorbunny that makes its way through our desert here, and there's a fun little niche that is filled by both Pinsir and Trapinch, because while Trapinch, you may know, is based on the antlion, a creature in the real world that does sit at the bottom of a pit that it creates, and it waits for its prey to fall down, occasionally throwing sand at them to help in this process, it turns out that Pinsir actually follows the same method of eating, or hunting, I guess, whichever way you want to put that, within the desert. To follow with our Trapinch, not only can you watch as a Scorbunny will dig one up and then they'll kind of go their separate ways, but you can help Mother Flygon feed her babies. Throughout the beginning of the portion of the desert, there are a number of twisters in the area. They pick up Scorpy, they pick up Cacnea, and when you light up some Crystalblooms to make one go away, it reveals a Flygon inside of it, being the creator of it. Toss some Fluffruit on the ground, and it'll slowly make its way down and pick it up. And instead of eating it, it'll actually walk off. Then, later on, when you see it again near its babies, or at least this big conical pit, you can then orbit, and then it'll come flying down and feed its baby Trapinch. I look very yellow. Why do I look so yellow? There we go, that's fixed. And now that we've mentioned them, Scorpy are another Pokemon that will bury themselves in the sand in wait to ambush their prey. You could lure them out with some fruit, of course, making them think that that is their prey. Otherwise, they are noted to be able to wait an extensively long time without food and just kind of exist here. Though they don't really have a friendly nature even amongst their own kind, as you can cause two to fight with each other over some fruit. Moving on to Cacnea, though, they don't really do all that much here. They're a little cute, but otherwise even their photodex notes their carefree nature as they just roll around. The photodex stating, Cacnea goes with the flow of its desert environment without a care in the world. Its thorns are so sharp that random objects sometimes get stuck to them, so you can just throw a fluff fruit onto them and watch them carry the fluff fruits with them as they roll around unabated. Is that even the right word to use? I'm not going to check it. I'm too tired for that. Pokemon that you might see, though, do include Meteor, Magikarp, Mandibuzz, and Silicobra, which all of them, from what I could see, don't have any major interactions. And I want to instead focus on Torchic, who you can watch not only burn fluff fruits before eating it, or burn it to an absolute crisp, depending on the scenario, but then you can also watch it jump onto Hippowdon's back. This is very much likely a reference to the Oxpecker once again, who will eat parasites on hippos as they have a symbiotic relationship. Though I suspect this goes even further because Hippowdon are known to get rocks lodged in the holes on their bodies and then need help. We do see one rolling around, and while that can be them spreading their scent, having fun, or just maybe trying to dislodge rocks from its body on its own. So Pokemon such as Torchic may actually do so whenever Dwebble isn't around, who is known to help this Pokemon. It is also very interesting to finally see Hippowdon as similar to a traditional hippo might be within the oasis, swimming around, enjoying itself, because otherwise these Pokemon are known to tunnel under the sand and eat whatever falls into its mouth, which is a terrifying concept. It would also explain, in other regions at the very least, why Hippowdon can be a lot more aggressive or a lot scarier, because if it's tunneling underground, then odds are it's eating the Scorpy. It might accidentally eat a Cacnea and whatever. Oh, Trapinch would be another great example. Silicobra, who's hiding away in the ground. Diglett. Like, there's a lot of Pokemon that do hide away in the ground, and Hippowdon traditionally would probably be just absolutely Hoover vacuuming them into its mouth. The last few interactions are fairly simple but fun to see, in my opinion. One being that you can scare a Heliolisk in one area, whereas otherwise it's just sleeping and moving around, by throwing some fruit into water where it is in the oasis. You actually toss the fruit to the left of it in the water, and then it causes a Magikarp to jump out, which then scares the Heliolisk as it comes crashing back down, and then that Heliolisk goes running across the lake's water. And this is a reference to a lizard that is nicknamed the Jesus Lizard because it just literally does that. Oh no, it doesn't perform miracles. It runs across the water at high speeds, and through not only the high speeds, but also the way that its feet are actually constructed, it is able to run across water. There are some Onix at the end of the alternate route. Okay, alright, well, some is the wrong word to use. There are a plethora of Onix moving and jumping around high into the sky that will even potentially disrupt Mandibuzz in the area from time to time. This also just serves as an easy spot for the Onix to tunnel through, in my opinion, though I'm sure they also have a major influence on shaping the desert sands in their hills, their valleys, and overall makeup. To what extent we don't clearly see, but it would not be surprising if they also kind of destroyed some of these rock walls that we do see, or any of these large pillars along the way. And the final interaction of the daytime is simply accomplished by watching nature take its course, as we often do see. Because as a Lycanroc moves about the sands, it will eventually encounter Tyranitar, and the two will fight each other before Lycanroc runs behind a rock wall. You might be waiting for it to come back out and attack the Tyranitar, but instead, the Tyranitar approaches this rock wall, and through orbing it, it will result in an impressive blow from the Tyranitar to the rock, demolishing it completely and revealing a tunnel that the Tyranitar now moves through to track down its aggressor. At night, things cool down again, and we get a slew of Pokemon we have already seen during the daytime. A hard to miss one is Sandshrew, as they come rolling down at top speeds over the hill and will continue to do so all around our route. They may interact with Meteor after they come crashing down in the area as well. Now, there is a very cool, or at least beautiful, scene with Flygon when it's near its babies. During the daytime, after it feeds its babies its apples, it Trapinch the apples, it might roll around in the air and spark off with all of its powers and make a nice little pretty scene. But instead, at night, if you wake it up, it'll do the same thing and have a much more beautiful and vibrant effect to it. In addition, we have Kangaskhan in the nearby area. The sweltering heat of the day, likely too much for its baby, and now comes out at night to ensure they both get to eat, drink, and play. And when a meteor lands near a Scorpy early on, and you orb that meteor while it's in the ground, it'll actually rise out of the ground, no longer in its shell, and it'll make its way over to the Kangaskhan, who will hold her baby up and allow it to play with the meteor as it passes by. And to take this even further, if you play a melody to calm them down and throw an apple, then what happens is the Kangaskhan will pick up the fluff fruit and hand it to its baby, and you get to watch just this adorable little scene as baby Kangaskhan is now just eating this fluff fruit. Also, for some reason, I never really thought of other Pokemon having a very friendly relationship with Meteor. It just kind of seemed to be such an isolated Pokemon before crashing down, only to be what I suspect to be mostly ignored, unless Pokemon actively were hunting for some sort of rare material that you do find in meteors. But considering Meteor here are said to be able to return to the atmosphere safely, they may have a better reoccurring relationship with other Pokemon that are native to these lands. Otherwise, nightlife really isn't all that different. We could see Silicobra potentially get intimidated by a midnight Lycanroc, some sleeping Hippowdon, a sandstorm caused by a Tyranitar when you actually release it from the sandstorm, plenty of sleeping Onix, and a meteor shower. And yes, you did hear me right. There are plenty of meteor that fall upon the lands here, and I gotta say, the night sky in this game is so very pretty. I mean, I already love looking at the night sky in real life and just staring up at those stars. You know what, I'm gonna do a side tangent. It's very cheesy, it's very corny, and I'm not sorry. but I remember before I actually started living with my now fiance, I would do the cheesy thing after a very long day of work where I would work a third shift and I'd be trying to get YouTube off the ground. So I was working like 14, 16 hour just days, going to sleep, waking up, maybe 18-hour days, right? And I would get home from that third shift after working as much as I could, and she's already asleep. I'm in a whole other location, and I would look up at those stars and I would just breathe and know that someday everything is going to work out. And it's working out. I'm very happy, to say the very least. So I'm a sucker for stars, I'm a sucker for space, and Meteor kind of holds a little bit of a special place in my heart because of this, especially when you get to see their rainbow meteor shower come down. And it is stated that only here in Paldea and Alola so far do the meteor actually crash down consistently, or even at all. And I would like to assume that this is because both regions have a very deep connection with nature overall. And I mean, Lental having a very deep connection with nature is kind of a no-brainer, I guess, because it's, you know, basically a preserve. We are at the semi-final island, Durice Island, derived from Durice in Latin for harsh, and I guarantee I said that wrong. This island is exactly that, though, without a doubt. A harsh landscape above and below, because while above the ground it is incredibly cold, with blizzards roaring through and layers of both snow and ice, the underground actually is warmer, so it's not actually as harsh, but good luck getting out of there and getting out alive. These caves hold flowing water, plant life, and plenty of glowing ores. These tunnels are vital to keeping Pokemon alive on this island, and I don't just mean Pokemon that need to take refuge during colder months that make things unbearable. I also mean Pokemon that would never survive more than an hour or two outside of these caves. Even an hour is kind of a strong assumption for some of them, because even if they did leave the caves, they may not find any of their preferred prey or foodstuffs in general. Instead, they live and thrive in these caves as their own little ecosystem, plants and all. And who better to have provided these massive tunnels than our Illumina Pokemon, Steelix. I love seeing Steelix here. It's not even one of my top 100 favorites, but because they are noted in their normal dex entries to be tunneling towards the core of the planet, that's why they are here. Because they are super powered in that habit that they have, causing them to dig extra further to actually try and reach that area. And with every single meter, every single foot that they dig downwards, it gives more space for more heat to rise up through and escape, thus creating this perfect little miniature environment for these Pokemon here. The water not only stays warm, but there's also the chance for warmer areas to cause said water to evaporate and then provide humidity. This humidity can stabilize the temperature and help keep it constant, and go further to provide not only plants, but also moss to grow. This Steelix moves fast, coming out of the tunnels present when you toss Fluffery into them, and you can even cause it to jump out of the depths of the canyon. It's when we get into the higher levels that, as usual, we get the interactions from other Pokemon. One such interaction is where we find Crobat chasing Noibat within the cave, but with Steelix here, it will roar to intimidate the Crobat and scare it away as it defends the little Noibat. Either of these bats can be found resting in the environment otherwise, and these Crobats seem to be a bit antagonistic, as they even seem to lure Steelix out in one of their interactions. Outside of this, you can see some Joltik, Carbink, and Sableye, but we'll talk about them outside of this area. They're not as much the Guardians or Watchful Eye as some of our other Pokemon that I've mentioned that are with the Illumina Pokemon tend to be. And at the start of this route, you can trigger an event where you will see the results at the end. Our Illumina Steelix napping with the 3 Noibats from the very beginning. I genuinely think this might be one of the greatest things that Snap does. It shows these massive or terrifying Pokemon, ones that we expect to be incredibly aggressive, with those smaller than it, or even those of the same size, it doesn't really matter, simply resting with Pokemon that are much weaker than themselves. Same thing goes with the Arbok and the Psyduck, the Steelix and the Noibat here, and so many more. And as they say, the true value of an individual shows when the strong interact with the weak. How do they show they care? Are they titans of war and destruction, or are they gentle giants aware of how fragile life really is and treats them with reverence and kindness? Backing up though, we move into Outaway Cave, which is a little bit of a oxymoron there, but a location where no sunlight reaches, leaving it pitch dark. The only thing to guide your way being the faint glow of ore. Not only do we find Vivillon here still, but we also find Magikarp in a few locations, which helps show that water is coming into this cave, while also showing how some sources of food may find their way in here for Pokemon such as the Beartic that appears walking on the upper snowy opening of the second cavern. I also want to note that with the Magikarp, they may be carrying either bacteria, or they could be carrying seeds, anything along those lines, to help populate the cavern in some capacity. We'll have a better chance to talk about the Beartic later. Similarly, Braviary can be found in a different cave section, though this might be a good resting spot for it to conserve energy. The Photodex easily explains why they are here. Braviary's appearance may stick out on the snowfields, but this warrior of the skies has survived nonetheless. Its courage is unmatched, and it never backs down from a challenge. We would also know that their Hisuian variant used to exist in freezing lands, making it so that way we can assume their feather insulation works just as well, or almost as well, as its modern day as it did then. In its modern day as it did then. The only difference is the presence of their psychic ability, which was just another way to improve their muscles and to help them fight and hunt. You can find more Crobat in these caves, and even get to see one potentially land and eat some fruit while on the ground, which is a bit awkward since it has those teeny tiny legs, but I love it. Plenty of Joltik can be seen around crawling on floors and walls, likely trying to absorb whatever bits of electricity that might be naturally being conducted by unknown means here. But if you do take an alternate route accessible post-game, with enough Fluffruit and Illumina orbs, you can cause some Joltik to interact with spikes of electricity left in the ground. The source of these spikes can be discovered as a Jolteon can be lured out from the brush, and if those Joltik were brought here, then instead of the spikes, then what they'll do is they'll notice the Joltik and jump directly onto its back instead. This is a massive boon for Joltik, since it needs help getting electricity or won't even be able to move. What makes this harder for the little spider, even though it's actually a pretty large spider, is that it still needs to eat actual food. The electricity that it stores in its body is just for movement, really. It's weird how that functions. And Joltik taking up some electricity is not known to harm any of the Pokemon that it draws energy from. We know that in other regions, such as Galar, it'll actually attach itself to a Yamper's butt while it is asleep, and it doesn't even wake it up while it's drawing the static electricity from them. But now, the presence of a Jolteon here should tell you that we'll have a very special guest by the time we are finished talking about this route. And I would break out your best manners for our soon-to-be royal guest. Nevertheless, Jolteon acts no differently, but to add to how important it is here, the fur that it sheds from its body continues to stay electrically charged for a long time. Through this, even if the Joltik can't find Jolteon or any other Pokemon that give off static electricity at the least, we can understand that they at least have the shed fur as another source to help them meet their needs. Originally, it was thought that the Jolteon here was upset, considering the electricity and the fur that is all spiked up, but the fur is actually standing up because there is a stronger magnetic field in this section. There's nothing else that plays into this idea of magnetic fields in the entirety of the island to what I've noticed or to my knowledge, but that's okay, I guess. This just tells us that the rocks that are here are not only conducting some level of electricity somehow, but that they are also magnetic. As you would expect, there are Geodude all over the place, and you can get a duo of them to stop fighting by interrupting their battle with a stalactite, which, to be fair, I would also stop fighting if I realized I could have been skewered by a stalactite, realizing how little the squabble actually mattered. So you can also decide to choose your favorite. Orbit, and the one that is orbed actually wins the fight, and that winner will do celebratory push-ups. Guys on an adrenaline high, I guess. There are also plenty of Noibat who move about the cave, but in a very lush area illuminated by a rather large glowing crystal. You can feed a few of them, and they will check the ripeness and overall quality of the fruit you throw by using their sonar on it, which is an adorable little sight. I do want to say I haven't identified a lot of the plants or a lot of the rock formations and stuff during this ecology, because it's almost irrelevant for the most part. I'm drawing your attention to where it's needed, such as that very, very large crystal. We don't really know exactly how it formed. We'd have to do some testing, and guess what? We're not in that world, so we can't do said testing. There's a lot of speculation, and there are definitely people better at geology than me, or geography. I keep messing that up. I'm pretty sure it's geology because it's the study of the rocks, and then geology and geography can go into the rock formations. Either way, there are definitely people that are way better than me who can probably tell you, even in the comments below, how the heck some of these properly formed just by looking at them for a couple of moments. What's important to know when it comes to the ecology segment of this is that whatever is causing these crystals to glow is also allowing that light that they let off to be absorbed by these plants. So whatever light it's letting off is vital to these plants and allows them to help grow, similar to what we'd expect from the sun. To add to this collection, though, you can also find a number of hidden pumpkaboo. By throwing orbs at them, they will flash their little high beams, and if you find them all, then a supersized pumpkaboo will appear at the end of the alternative route. These are a little bit strange to me because pumpkaboo isn't the pumpkin itself, it's the cat-like shadow that emerges from it, and these Pokemon thrive on the energy of souls. Their size even depending on the number of souls that are contained within them, so I guess you might say that they are here to serve as a population control? Take your pick as to what you might believe. Croagunk being found here. Oh wait, hold on, they might be a decomposing factor of the caves. That might be it actually. But moving on to Croagunk, them being found here actually makes sense considering that they can actually be found in most very moist environments such as marshes or swamps. This allows their skin to stay, well, moist, as they are also seen to have the dry skin ability. And while I've never really been able to nail down what they eat, especially because their personality and their dex entries kind of insinuate this idea that they only fight when necessary, and they are fighting types, and a lot of fighting type Pokemon typically don't eat other Pokemon or any other living creature. They kind of stick to plants, beans, you know, so on and so forth. But I assume with this Pokemon, as typical, that they're eating vegetation despite them being inspired by creatures such as poison dart frogs. What we do know, though, outside of that speculation, is that they can be found inflating the poison sacs in their cheeks in a rhythmic way as they sing out do, re, mi. But if you interrupt them in a specific order, they will laugh and inflate their cheeks. I would actually really love to see more comparisons of Croagunk and other frog or toad Pokemon inflating their bodies in some capacity to sing and communicate. I don't know why, it just seems endearing, probably because there was a house that I grew up in for a couple of years where outside of my window I would hear the bullfrog sing dang near every single night during the summer. We get more Pokemon composed, at least partially from souls, with the inclusion of Drifloon here, doing as they normally do. They might be here because of the colder weather, causing them to shrink in size, and so they fall down here until they can recover, because their bodies are partially made up of air, partially made up of souls. Alternatively, considering how they are kind of portrayed to be within this region, they might even be helping other Pokemon escape the cold, or even escape from these caves. A couple of Clefairy can be found here too, some sleeping, others will levitate or dance, but nothing too crazy. There are Sableye hiding behind stalagmites, really leaning into that creep factor through the shine of their eyes. This Pokemon also has a diet consisting entirely of gemstones, which is shown through them mostly being near crystals within these caves or digging. Though you can catch one sleeping, which is something I will actually never get used to, because I kind of come to the conclusion through a number of videos that not all ghost Pokemon are actually ghosts. In fact, most of them just flat out aren't ghosts at all and can still die. But for some reason, seeing them sleep still catches me off guard. We don't see any of these Sableye trying to hunt down any of the Carbink as we might see it do in other regions, but there may be a more mythical reason as to why that doesn't occur here. I really hope it's a mythical. If I'm wrong, that joke does not land. We do get a few more dinosaurs through Rampardos, its impact being strong enough to make the cave walls shake, which I'm sure dislodges stalactites. It might even loosen rocks in other areas to allow more sources of water to trickle through for the rest of our residents here. Once again, they, as with many of our other Pokemon, aren't really shown trying to attack or eat anyone else, despite us knowing that it absolutely would at least eat Shieldon and Bastiodon amongst other Pokemon given the chance. Though there is one interaction it has with my favorite goofy boy of all time, Gengar. Because throughout this route, you can see 2 Gengar appear multiple times, especially if you mess with the absolutely massive portals that appear throughout the cave. With the Rampardos, they will try to charge Gengar only to run into the wall as it disappears. You'll see it scare Carbink and even scare the sleeping Krogunk from earlier. And I don't have it noted here for some reason, but you can see a really cool interaction where there's nothing really that happens, but it's Gengar and Clefairy talking with each other, and I believe they just kind of look up at you after you notice them or orb them. After all, the old legend goes that a Gengar is simply created from a Clefairy's shadow. So seeing that in this game is such a nice nod to that old just lore idea that the community came up with that has never been made official and just kind of isn't. So despite everything we know, say it with me one last time, despite Gengar being a Pokemon known to hunt down others, it is taking on the more innocent side of things and just playing pranks on the Pokemon of this location. Though it would still be pretty dope to just watch it just grab one of these Pokemon and disappear completely into the portal and never reappear. If you love the Goopy Dragon, you'll be happier to hear that Goodra will appear in these caves. It's just kind of vibing more than anything, and if Magikarp get a little too close to it, it'll just splash the Magikarp away from it. The Photodex explains exactly why it's here as well, because it states, I suspect the Goodra in the cave lives near water so it can moisten up its protective goo when it needs to. Goodra are very kind-hearted and do their best to protect other Pokemon. It would be pretty hard to stay moist if, the outside world is a desolate land of cold and ice after all, so Goodra stays in here, living within these caves for its whole life. And it's likely more than happy with that since it can see many of its friends regularly without having to travel far. Though this is not the only dragon within these caves, as Hydreigon can be followed to what is noted to be its territory. It will be very protective and even aggressive as it guards the area, but you can get there through playing music and feeding it. You might be thinking that Hydreigon should be an absolute terror, destroying and eating everything that it sees, but I'm here to say that it is canonically stated that that is what the elderly people perpetuated. Yes, there may have been some terrible Hydreigon in the past, but through stories that people created, Hydreigon, just like Zoroark, were hated for wrongful reasons and helped them become more evil or mischievous in order to survive as they were constantly attacked. And I do find it very interesting that the Pokemon strongly inspired by Yamata no Orochi and the more negative side of the Kitsune were both given their dark typing and given negative rumors spread about them throughout the world of Pokemon. And despite these rumors, Zoro's line is known to be very able to be very kind, while Hydreigon is stated to have been potentially very, very different if people stopped attacking it relentlessly anytime it just kind of appeared. And then you might be sitting here saying, well, we don't have anything like that in real life, and I point you at the Pitbull. I love Pitbulls, they're fantastic, but they're given such a bad rep by people for being incredibly aggressive or horrible little monsters, when in fact, they can be very, very adorable animals. And I was raised with Pitbulls when I was younger, so, I kind of have a soft spot as well for Hydreigon and Zoroark's stories through this. Our last Pokemon, before we reveal our special residence within these caves, is Mawile, a Pokemon that will eat whatever it doesn't like the taste of with the hair mouth that it has, which is actually just its horns. They're noted to be slow to warm up to us through the Photodex info, being a little aggressive even and defensive, but when we find it amongst some Carbink, we can ease this process for them. Orb them and play some music to bear witness to the Crystal Princess herself, Diancie. And it is in this section that we see plenty of crystals. They aren't really diamonds, so it's hard to say that Diancie made them, but there isn't anything saying she can't make non-diamond rocks. It just has to be carbon-based, I suppose. Plus, this section also at least shows us why Sableye aren't attacking the Carbink. They already have a massive food supply already available, and I mean, you probably don't want to be on the bad side of a Diancie. Though I would go and dare to say that these crystals, similar to the crystals in the Diancie movie, may be helping provide life to the cave in some special way that we aren't really informed about. Even if this isn't the case, the crystals still serve as a food source for a number of different Pokemon. And of course, as with any area, there are the ruins, though these are incredibly special ones that will lead us to our understanding of the islands as a whole. For in an area lit up by orange crystals, we find a damaged mural worn down by time. There are meteor-like objects racing down into an area seemingly guarded by a blue shield, and within that shield there are 5 Pokemon: Meganium, Melodic, Volcarona, Steelix, and Wishiwashi in its school form, the 5 Illumina Pokemon. Though at its center, the mural has been worn away the most, and it is from that center that it seems energy is being poured out, while the Illumina Pokemon has energy around them as well. What this means, we will soon find out when we move on to our final island. But for now, we have one last location on Durice to talk about. A shimmering, frigid landscape encased in perpetual ice and snow, the perfect location for our polar Pokemon or any that love to eat ice itself. Of course, there are Vivillon here, but I love the idea that these Pokemon can just kind of exist in any environment and their extremes. Similar to that, there's Magikarp in the lake at the end of the route, which likely explains where they come from when we are down below. Even if it's a little bit of water, that can build up into a small reservoir below, and then that can empty out into the caves that we are inside of. Furrets are surprisingly here. I never saw them as much of a creature that freely lives in colder environments, but here it is, and it kind of makes sense because half of their body is like the fluffy fur tail. They dig holes in the ground as they would in any other place, but now these dens serve as an even better place to keep warm or even travel through when there are predators on the prowl. Alternatively, they'll even hide in fallen trees throughout the lands. Beartic returns with its Cubchoo running around as well, and while Cubchoo can be seen with Mamoswine and Swinub, there are moments where Beartic will not only chase away Dugong in the water, but you can also anger it further and cause it to rear at a nearby Mamoswine. Rear? I meant to say roar. What is up with my script here? This is likely it just venting to the Mamoswine, considering we can assume when it was a Cubchoo, it likely spent time around other Mamoswine and they're friendly, which would also explain why Cubchoo are around it now, because Beartic in this area are said to keep a watchful eye on them. Though to contradict what I just stated, the Photodex states Beartic has a rather violent temper and often fights with Mamoswine over territory, but it shows its more nurturing side when it rescues Cubchoo that need its help. So this is another situation that can be explained easily by having both scenarios be possible. The Cubchoo can spend time with the Mamoswine family, but if they step on each other's lawns in the wrong way, well, there's going to be some fighting. There's a little adorable moment where if you can lure out a Cubchoo, Beartic will actually help it get down from a high place very safely, just grabbing it by the noggin like a claw machine and bringing it down to the ground. There's a pack of Mightyena at the end of the alternate route, but we'll talk about them more later. One Pokemon that follows its traditional dex entries through and through is Weavile. They appear in groups and they'll even scratch the trees in the area. These marks that they leave behind are their way of communicating with over 500 distinct signs recorded. I imagine it's very similar to how highbrow burglars will communicate, little signs or symbols that are symbolic of greater senses like food here, danger Beartic, dinner was great last night, we should meet up again sometime soon, how does the 18th sound about 6 p.m. at the restaurant run by the Alolan Raticate sound, little things like that. And you can cause the Weavile to group together and be an accomplice to another murder as they fight against 2 Mamoswine in the field, because that's exactly what they do. They pack together and they hunt everything, big or small. Alternatively, the Mamoswine will live peacefully, and as for their little Swinub babies, you can help them as they struggle up a hill, throwing an orb to get them with enough energy to make it to the top despite their tiny little baby legs. And yes, I'm assuming there are legs and they're not just some weird little fur snail in their first form. Swinub have a great sense of smell, allowing them to find things buried in the snow, such as roots, their favorite mushrooms, or hot spring geysers. The Mamoswine accompany them wherever they go, whenever it's dangerous, helping them feel much safer, especially as the hardened icy tusks that Mamoswine have are strong enough to withstand even Beartic's claws. Surprisingly, as we move away from them, Skarmory can be found flying around and even performs tricks in the air. It doesn't really interact with anything, and I always kind of imagined it as a scavenger Pokemon who may attack others as prey on occasion. Otherwise, this harsh environment is great for it whenever it seeks isolation, its sturdy body being able to take the harsher side of the climate here and potentially even hardening it further, because at least in its dex entries, I don't know if there's multiple of them, there's at least one, it does state that they nest inside of like thorn bushes, which then help them as they grow up after hatching get this hardened just carapace that they kind of have. Using carapace with a bird feels weird to say, but it's kind of true. Tunneling through these snowy lands, you can be the center of a jealous photographer's mind, as we can watch a lowland Sandslash move about with ease. They react to both photos and scans, even cheer when you throw fruit in the section overwrought with a blizzard. These guys are said to be a very fast-moving Pokemon. In fact, one of the fastest-moving Pokemon in icy places such as this, their claws easily digging through the ground, but they can also climb up the icy walls thanks to those claws being very ice pick-like. Speaking of our alternate route though, there are a couple of Pokemon here that have some more significance at night. This alternate route has a constant blizzard, which is partially because of Abomasnow. Here we can also see Frostmoth flying through while also finding it in a later cave section on the main route. There's Crabominable here, evolving from Crabrawler simply by being in these frigid lands. The problem with this though is that this Crabominable likes to just punch whatever it sees without stopping to think. This results in them punching a large block of ice in one part, and another incident that we will talk about at night. At the end of this alternate route though is a big watering hole where the ice is cracked open, allowing water underneath staying unfrozen for now. And that water now flows a little bit. Here we also find groups of Spheal rolling around who can be tossed up like a ball from Dugong in the area. The two are noted to like playing with each other, and whether it be thanks to Spheal's fluffy fur coat, as the dex notes, or the fat that Dugong has, they both stay plenty warm here. In fact, Dugong's streamlined body allows it to have little drag and gain the ability to swim with incredible speeds through the water. They are noted to not eat their fruit in the water at all, instead preferring to eat on top of the ice floats. This is likely because it feels safer there and can enjoy its meal rather than having to worry about swimming and trying to eat at the same time. And unlike the real relationship that we see between seals, sea lions, and penguins, Piplup is all around this water. You can even help it gain the courage to jump into the water by throwing an orb at it, which will then prompt Piplup to dive deep below and return with a cute little shell in its flipper. It's stated that they like to find shells underwater and show them off to their friends. And as we do close out the alternate routes and venture into some caves, there are a few more Pokemon hiding out. There are Glalie and Frostlass who may accompany each other on level 2, both even being found by some ruins. Their presence here allows us to see how all the Snowruns got here, and if you want to feed the Snowruns, you just need to knock down some icicles, as ice is their only source of food, and they love it. It's also here in the caves or other enclosed spaces that Snowruns feel protected. They'll even go as far as digging holes into mounds of snow together. The Glalie we do see is noted to actually be happy with the Frostlass, its face typically seen to be in a permanent scowl or just in angry in general, while Frostlass's info is changed a little bit. It is not stated to freeze others and eat their souls, but rather freeze things in general and display them as decorations, which it decorated the ruins with. And to be entirely fair, Frostlass is another yokai-inspired Pokemon amongst many hundreds of other ones that likely has plenty of rumors spread about it more than actual fact. So every single one being said to consume souls is likely incorrect based on what we are told within Lental at the very least. There are some Avalugg here who swim about and give Pokemon such as Skarmory and Vanillix a ride, but in a special interaction, since Glalie is known to eat ice, frozen creatures, and creatures made of ice, you can actually still cause it to bite Avalug's tail. I don't think that's gonna go well. But of course, though, now that I've mentioned the ruins, I'm sure you're waiting on the evolution and the mythical or legendary Pokemon of this route. We'll just wait a little bit longer because there are some Pokemon I skipped over, such as Snom and Frostmoth. These Snom are hidden throughout both routes, and if you light up the hidden ones on the alternate route, they will cheer as a Frostmoth approaches, likely being their mother. This Frostmoth is another source of our blizzards and can also be found on either route depending on the level. Snom are known to eat ice and snow, pretty much primarily or only, and to protect itself while it sleeps, it ties itself to an icicle with its thread. If it is startled, it'll burrow right down into the snow in a flash, and if you do mess with these babies, or these snowfields in general, freezing scales will be released by Frostmoth to exact vengeance on the offender. Otherwise, it is elegantly fluttering around the island, noted to be wonderfully calming and peaceful. As we near the end of this route, we find not only Alolan Vulpix here, who just simply appears, but we also find Glaceon. It can be seen in the mountaintop on the distance, and by taking a picture of it there, it will appear here at the end. And through throwing some fruits and orbing it, a single cry is all it takes for it to create a snowstorm, revealing that despite all of our other thoughts, Glaceon may be the true reason behind the blizzard, showing us once again that an evolution is acting as a sort of regulator or guardian of a route, given that special role. And you've likely noticed it already, but the majority of these Pokemon are white or blue in color, allowing them to blend better with their landscape. This is vital for any would-be prey species, as they can hide from predators. And of course, the same can be said about predator species, as they can sneak around and ambush their prey easier themselves. So, you know, win-win, lose-lose situation going on here. As we shift to the night, biting cold envelops the land and rips away what warmth remains, yet there are Pokemon that still persist. The Vivillon appear, but also take refuge in the caves where they can keep warm together in the tighter spaces. There are small holes in the ice where we can cause Magikarp to jump out, and the first thing you'll actually see is a pack of Mightyena. They will chase different Pokemon, but the most significant of them all, as they communicate with each other and track it down, is Furret. It will try to keep up, but it will eventually escape, and one Mightyena will howl in frustration at the loss of a meal. As per the photo decks, wild Mightyena live in packs with very strict hierarchies. When the pack leader howls, the others howl with it to send information to faraway allies. Hyenas in real life are actually incredibly intelligent and get a really bad rep thanks to media. They've slowly but surely become one of my favorite animals over time, thanks to my own, stories with a Mightyena named Ed, which is why there's the Mightyena right behind me. Though, unfortunately, Furret isn't safe just by getting away from Mightyena, as it also can be seen running away from Weavile on the alternate path. Those Weavile now may be sitting in the trees, waiting for unsuspecting prey to cross its path. You can interrupt its hunt and knock it off the tree, causing its head to actually get stuck in the snow. Cubchoo, Snorunt, and Beartick can be seen sleeping alongside each other. Braviary are seen flying above or sleeping, even squawking at Sandslash when they are revealed. And these Alolan Sandslash are exactly as they are described when a photographer wishes to capture them once more, hiding under the snow with only their icicles peeking out. It's a shame that we don't really get to see them at the sunrise or sunset with this, as that's supposed to help them gleam with absolute beauty, and that is what the photographer really wants to see. It's hard to say if Braviary are actually going to hunt the Sandslash, but in any other region and any other scenario, I would 100% expect them to take a chance when necessary, but not have the Sandslash as part of their regular diet, maybe the Alolan Sandshrew, because icy steel and all that, it makes them very heavy, and also they're kind of scary when it comes to their frostbite icicle attacks. We find Abomasnow sleeping in a number of areas, though if you use a Crabominable to punch the tree that one of these Abomasnow are resting against, it will become irate and release a blizzard around it. A Frostlass will also be dislodged from this tree and move on ahead from here. There are a number of locations in which we might find Delibird just kind of waddling around, even at the very beginning of the route, sometimes when you boot it up. And in 2 special cases, we can watch it put 2 fruits into its bagtail, or even play music and have it offer one of those fruits back to us. Christmas bird do be gifting though. But this is another potentially vital part to weaker individuals within this ecosystem, as Delibird is kind enough to offer food to others on the mountain. It is noted to be an omnivore though, so it's tough to say what it will offer to everyone. And something that comes to mind that is actually really important is how these animals are moving across the snow. There are a lot of different animals that have a lot of different features, and when it comes to snow moving animals, you either A, want that wide open foot so that way you don't sink into the snow, especially if the snow is a softer kind during a certain time of the year, or you would want to have specialized paw pads similar to what we see in snow leopards that then allow them to move across the snow without putting their weight down as much and without crunching onto the snow and ice, again allowing both prey and predator to move about quietly and not crunch the snow, so that way they can either get away or sneak up on the prey. More Snom and Frostmouth are around, with the Snom following behind Piplup and Delibird, a couple of Snowruts, Dugongs, Feel Sleeping, some Vanilluxe, and a number of Jinx on either route that you take. You can wake them up, get them to dance, and even get a kiss blown to you when you play music to it. In another very interesting entry only found in the photo decks, it says, "I've heard that Jinx can make all sorts of things happen just by wishing for them." We did see some odd occurrences in the Shiver Snowfields involving Jinx, so there may be some truth to that claim. Jinx have always held such a strange place within the world of Pokemon. In the other Snap game, they guard Articuno's egg and are also regarded as a queen in the snowy lands of Galar, and yet we still sit here knowing very little about them and their history. What makes them even more impressive though is that you will see an Aurus trapped inside a wall of ice, and by leading the sleeping Jinx to a crystal bloom and lighting it, the 2 Jinx will work together to then release the Aurus from its icy prison. How it got here is a really good question, but I'm willing to bet that the lands may have still gotten incredibly cold during an ice age and frozen many dinosaurs amongst other Pokemon within these lands, and instead of them dying, they stayed frozen until Jinx released them, maybe a wish to grant it life once more. Some of these dinosaurs would also then populate the other areas, but again, that isn't to say that every single prehistoric creature in Lental was frozen and then revived, but that some Pokemon may have been. In lieu of the meteor disaster that did occur, we still got the Ice Age. If those Feel we talked about aren't pushed around, then there's a group of Piplup who will begin a race, with one of them being so excited that it kind of goes on its tiptoes like it's an adorable little child. And once again, we do find Glaceon, who will create diamond dust around the Alolan Vulpix if you orbit, and there's some Avalugg vibing for the most part. But if you orb a Jinx riding on an Avalugg, it will summon my 3rd favorite Pokemon of all, Suicune. And look at my baby zoom across those waters. It's a hassle to throw an orb at it, but if you do it right, it will then stop in the ice flow right in front of you, and later on it will release a snowstorm around itself when it approaches Delibird, Piplup, and Snom, entertaining them. So as a little recap, we have seen Shaman, who represents flowers, clean air, and gratefulness, Mew, the ancestor of all Pokemon who were born on Earth naturally, Celebi, the guardian of time, Manaphy, who represents compassion and is either prince or princess of the sea, Ho-Oh, the rainbow phoenix of the sky, Lugia, the guardian of the sea, and Suicune of the northern winds, all of which have appeared near ruins, and all of which are heavily celebrated Pokemon by humanity. But that's still not every single mythical or legendary. We have 2 left that we will get to on the next and final island, and these 2 alone will answer a multitude of questions for us. So as we say goodbye to Durice Island and its wintry splendor, another extreme environment that is full of life, that evolved to become hardy or took residence in the safety of the warm caves, we enter our finale of Lental's ecology. A small, long-forgotten island, Aurum Island. It holds clues to uncovering what happened in this region's ancient past. Aurum is directly Latin for gold, and there's no hiding it this time. They put it right in front of our face, and for this one, we will specifically begin with the Ruins of Remembrance Level 1, because there is such a dramatic difference once we uncover the Illumina Pokemon that we actually need to go through this one in the order that it is played, which also means that I actually have to use footage from my stream, because once you play through this part, then it changes the entire game and the routes forever. Welcome though to the Ruins of Remembrance. Outside of the ruins, you are introduced to a number of Pokemon, one of which being a Houndoom who comes to greet you. As you would look around and go through this area, a few Houndoom may follow you, they might stretch and yawn, and be found inside of the ruins, but they otherwise serve as a very passive role. The photo deck states that pack of Houndoom seem to be working together to protect the ruins. Some people say their eerie howls sound like the Grim Reaper. And I hope you're ready, because there are plenty of omens, guardians, and bringers of life here, and they hold many answers to many proposed questions. We'll find Eldegoss floating around outside and grouping together, even releasing seeds from their head. It is through their efforts that the photo dex states the Lental region as a whole is kept lush and green as they spread various plant seeds throughout the islands. Remember what I said earlier on, stating that maybe grass-type Pokemon will release seeds of all different types of fruits or vegetation in general to make sure that the environment stays healthy? This is our proof of that, at least through Eldegoss, that at least Eldegoss does this in the Lental region. Now, as we move forward, you can attract a Natu to some fruit if you throw it outside. They may stand on it instead of eating it, and despite not seeing the future in the same capacity as its evolution Xatu, it still can see the future. They also seem less timid here, more comfortable, and move about the area easily as though they are more familiar or very familiar with the lands themselves. Before we dive in, you also get to see the Omen Pokemon itself in Level 2, Absol, high above on a cliff outside the ruins. We'll see it again later, but this is a Pokemon that has appeared on routes before many legendary Pokemon in the mainline games. Its photodex tells us everything we need to know. People say that Absol can predict all sorts of disasters with its horn. It seemed to be protecting you just as much as it was protecting the ruins. In other words, the disaster that occurred here is so massive that it continues to affect the behaviors of Pokemon to this day. They prepare themselves, understanding that without these ruins, all of Lental could fall. Though since you, as the player, are identified as a person who truly loves Pokemon, this Absol has decided to protect you from any upcoming disaster just as much as it would protect the ruins themselves. As we move deeper inside and down a hole, we find ourselves within the ruins. It is here that we can encounter both Salandit and Noivern. In one case, you can feed them, though in higher levels, you can cause them to fight with each other with a well-placed fruit. The Salandit noted to not stand Noivern at all, and so they sneak around and communicate with each other as they hunt for food without getting caught. Meanwhile, the Noivern is actively searching everywhere for Salandit, using ultrasonic waves to find and even attack them. So, something that I just thought of is that we know that Salandit's evolution will use pheromones a lot of the time to attract the Salandit and tell them what to do. Salandit themselves likely still release a pheromone in some capacity in order to communicate with each other rather than actually talking. Otherwise, their predators, such as Noivern or anybody who's an aggressor to them, may actually be able to find them easier. So, pheromones is the communication method. It's hard to understand exactly why Noivern is attacking them, because at least within this region, it doesn't have an antagonistic relationship with anyone else. Though, we may be able to suspect that it may be protecting the ruins from Salandit that will just destroy what you will soon know to be sacred land. But just before we cross that final threshold, we have a singular well where we can cause Woobat and Magikarp to emerge. The Woobat, of course, react to our scanner by using sonar in return before flying ahead. And as you do cross the threshold, the first Pokemon you will encounter is Sigilyph, known to be a wandering patrol guardsman of the skies. If you were a threat to these ruins, it would not hesitate to immediately just blast you, and in fact, if you do bother it, it will use its psychic power to warn others. More from the photo decks. The Sigilith patrolling the ruins of Remembrance let out a warning whenever it noticed anything. It must have been guarding those ruins for a very long time. And finally, after taking a gander at the heart-shaped marks left on a wall by Woobat, I show you the ruins themselves in all their glory. A creation of both stone and what seems to be natural life fused together as an armored tree of sorts. Around it there are 5 statues sat in the middle of a pool of colored water each, those 5 statues being the great Illumina Pokemon of the islands we have already met. There are several Behem here guarding this altar, and they even seem to give orders to Golurk in the area, the massive titans that they are. And despite the two and their intimidating nature, we find that the other Pokemon are very friendly with them, even having Natu adorably nestled on a Golurk as it stands unmoving. If you make the mistake of bothering the first 2 Behem inside the ruins, several Golurk will be called into the chamber, flying to come resolve the problem at hand, and that is horrifyingly intimidating. So if you were a true intruder or someone who wished to do harm, you would not be making it out of this area alive. In higher levels, we have our last few Pokemon. A Chandelure will appear as you descend into the ruins, and it will wander around. It could be seen absorbing energy from its surroundings if uninterrupted, which is only the case when you distract the Absol in the area, meaning that this Chandelure is not a welcome Pokemon here, as it takes the necessary energy from this altar, though it is at least noted to live in the ruins, just not as a protector of said ruins. And finally, there is Umbreon, who can be drawn out of the first room of the ruins with fruit before it runs deeper into it. At first, you'll find it asleep later on, but by waking it up, Absol will join along with it, the two being noted to hang out with each other a lot. Though, after your first time through, you can play again, light up all the crystal blooms, and it takes some effort to do so, as you'll have to work with the other Pokemon here, providing them energy or fruit to get them to move. As the crystal bloom are lit up, the waters around the statues will glow with power, and that energy will flow into the altar. By the end, you will see a cluster of crystal blooms, one from each of the islands and one new one. Light up the last new crystal bloom you will ever see, and a pillar of light will explode ahead. That pillar is guarded by both a Behem and a Golurk, and by providing energy so they move, you ascend into the final stage. And don't worry, we'll talk about the mythical that we do find here on this route after we talk about our number 1 Illumina Pokemon, the originator of it all, in the final ruins. We are given our last cinematic introduction to a Pokemon that represents life itself. A Pokemon of color and beautiful lights brazenly displayed upon its antlers, as we are introduced to the source of the Illumina phenomenon, Xerneas. You see, Xerneas is the one missing at the center of that mural we talked about. With history as we know it, I can now give you an almost complete basic picture. The presence of ancient ruins on all the islands indicates that the region had been inhabited by humans for a very long time. 2,000 years ago, the region was threatened by a meteor strike, but it was saved by the Illumina Pokemon, creating a barrier over the region. And isn't it strange that 3,000 years ago there was a meteor in Hoenn, then 2,000 years ago another meteor, and then every millennia we just keep having a comet rain down upon the world of Pokemon? Well, hold on to those questions, because we do have answers after Xerneas here. Now, Xerneas will turn into a pure ball of light and move around. It is noted to be the first Illumina Pokemon, and with our understanding that it can grant eternal life, we can now assume there are no heirs to the throne of Illumina. Every single one of those Illumina Pokemon we have encountered have been given eternal life, as they serve to be eternal guardians of their islands thanks to Xerneas. And with all of its glitz and glam, by the end of this route, Xerneas will return back to its slumbering form, a tree, leaving us with the question of when it will truly fully awaken from its slumber. And honestly speaking, while many of the Pokemon from the previous area can be found here, many of them just simply exist in rooms or areas near Xerneas. Houndoom will howl in reverence, and both Umbreon and Natu can be found sleeping nestled up to Xerneas, likely waiting for the day that it'll wake up, seeing the future in Natu's eyes for that day, but otherwise Xerneas' only other trick is to perform geomancy if given enough life orbs. But I think I'm ready to just genuinely close this out with our very last Pokemon of Pokemon Snap. A Pokemon that I have claimed to save people before through the power of wishes. A Pokemon that awakens every 1,000 years, seemingly in perfect time with the meteors that rain down upon the world every 1,000 years. A Pokemon that appears post-game, as with many of our other legendaries and mythicals, the Wish Pokemon Jirachi. You may have noticed its crystal shell at some point, but I wasn't going to reveal it until now. We consult the photo decks for the last time today. Jirachi's wondrous power allows it to grant any wishes written on the notes attached to its head. I hardly dared hope when we saw first its crystal shell, but I'm so glad we were lucky enough to encounter it. It will fly around the ruins, being one of the first Pokemon to greet us in the post-game. It can be woken up when we see it sleeping later on, and before we ascend it to meeting Xerneas, we can watch it celebrate and dance if we have illuminated everything, orbed Jirachi, and played music. And the most beautiful part, when you take a photo of it as it celebrates and it poses, the mission states, "This is an amazing photo. That's the pose Jirachi makes when it's granting a wish." The ruins of the many islands of Lental, eternal life, protection granted by the Illumina Pokemon, the presence of many deeply praised and worshipped Pokemon within the world, and the protection from a destructive threat originating from space itself. What does this mean for the entirety of Lental? While I will be digging into the lore of Lental in another video, I will say this. Lental as a whole is a land frozen in time, a place that is perfectly preserved and has been so pure since the meteors fell on that fateful day. The residents of these islands were one with nature, people who truly loved nature, loved Pokemon, and saw them not as two different sides of the same coin, but rather saw all of life as one singular and cohesive unit. Lental has its prey and its predators, but they are more than just that. They are provided safety and shelter. They are provided food beyond imagination through an abundance of flora, and the Pokemon live alongside one another, mostly in peace. Lental goes against what we have assumed Pokemon are from beginning to end. We assume that all Hydreigon are destructive monsters. We assume that there's not any way for Corsola and Marini to coexist peacefully, that great titans like Steelix would never rest peacefully with tiny cave dwellers such as Noibat. Yet we are proven wrong through the power of this region. There is a small part of me that I will admit has teared up a couple of times, and I feel a little depressed now because I loved going through this and understanding it all. I'm also an emotional person, so be it. And I have a very strong attachment to animals as a whole, which is why I love Pokemon. But now there's no more to talk about in regards to this. I wish I could see this game for every single Pokemon region, because it's just never gonna be the same from here on in. This was about as close to true ecology as we could get. But don't worry, I will still do my best for Galar and Paldea, and of course with the Pokemon Legends games. Yes, I will do both of the Legends games that we know of, hopefully more in the future. I do implore you though, to my writers, to artists, to my Pokemon tabletop players, anyone who is a creative mind and loves Pokemon, or even just loves animals in general, when you write about Pokemon, when you write about animals or look at nature as a whole, keep this in mind. Keep Lental in mind. Because Pokemon are just super powered animals. Our real world animals also break the boundaries of what we understand every single day. There are millions of things that we are still learning, things that we have not seen yet, behaviors, diets, coexistence between animals in their times of need, and so much more. So keep your eyes and ears out with your minds wide open, because you may be joyously surprised by how this world really works, both our real world and the world of Pokemon. Up next, I will actually be looking into the G-Max phenomenon. I already made the thumbnail for that one before I even finished this script, and I'm just super excited for that one too. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this so far, please do make sure you subscribe. Leave a comment, like I said, about your favorite interaction that I may have mentioned or even didn't mention within Pokemon Snap. Things that you would hope to see even in future Pokemon games or maybe even a future Snap game. Comments and watch time are the #1 best free way to help boost the reach of a video or a channel. And if you want to go even further, you can always become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month, which helps me with commissioning much better artwork from people such as Muse Art World, who it just takes the weight off of me and creates something much better to really make these videos pop. And overall, it just honestly supports the channel so I can focus on higher quality content more and more and more. And before we go, let's go ahead and shout out all the members of the channel as a thank you. Thank you all our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Crown Final Fantasy 14, Heals for Life, Pickens, Vatty, Knit, Buzz, and Summer, then Champions, Andrew Martinez, Costa, Joshua Pickens, Wilson, and then the Knights of the Core, Vatty, Lemon, Kelsey, Hoover, Covers, Luke Sasti, Crumbo, Vio, Mothra, Manzo, Double, Shiny, Gems, Sarah, Brisway, Fix My Nitrogen, Quill Fantasy 14, Pile, Allen, Heals for Life, Lou Dalek, and Warren Hemphill. Then all of our wonders of the channel, Mr. Hellhound, Yep, Super Saiyan, Sun, Goku, Emil Wickstrom, I Wish I Was Drunk, Voidy Reaper, JC Hero, Ocean Man 7, Tavorius, Gazi, Inver Fossils, Ryan Schwenk, Shoot Past the Limit, Chidori, Phoenix 1, Vanny, Zamaru, Gal, Snake Sun, 520, Kagyo, Tsutsuki, Cool Breeze, Eric, Max Supreme, Shadowhawk 19, Lost Wisteria, Diswardy, Emperor, Softy and Kai, Tamarco, Zakai, Inferno, Twitch, Lydia Marie, Elder, Dennis Garcia, Lion Clan, Nathan Palmer, Sophie, Favark, The Chi, Kristen Cap, Cliv, Lumica, Daniela 808, Roger McLean, Supporting Work, Kamutalk 123, Star S, Spiral Master, Jay Gill, Abdallah Lottie, Gaming Rudes, 9L707, Evil Chan, Ruby, Micah 626 Gaming, Nicole Manaskian, Kristen, Sandwich Boss, Emmy, whatever this is, Michael Stein, Alolan Figment, Meneco 2873, Sydney House, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Al, Hussein Kassam, Rebecca Connell, Hune, Jappy W, Memento Mortem, Marshy, Edward Kosowski, Fenica Fox, Nerders Freeberg, Hag, Addy Cadabra, King Pie, Jack of Ross, Richie Snivy, Addy C, Jacob Square, DJ Monk 23, Squidwater, Rice Smith, Gamer Bad Dragon, I Just J, M, MD, Horsewood, Cocktail, Muse, Art World, Telumiel, Gwendolyn, Eastgander 772, Andrew Foss, Pick Anonymous, Summon Sloth, Knock Ian, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Corner of the Comet, Sleepy Bear, Jericho, Summon Sloth, Unseelie King, The Vorians Guys, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Dylan Peters, Mackley Burkhart, and Heather Weisnett. Thank you all for being members of the channel. It goes a very long way to support the channel and content for everybody to enjoy. If you would like to become a member of the channel, get a number of different perks, and hear your name at the end of every single video as part of the credits, then become a member for as little as $3 a month and support the channel. With that then, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. It does mean the world to me. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't think I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.